Welcome, welcome. You're here at Beyond Hogwarts. Today we present to you, what if Tony Stark and Pepper Potts found baby Harry at age 2 and arc reactor magic made him Iron Wizard. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, Doorstep. The rain had been falling since Heathrow, which Tony took as England's way of personally welcoming him back with the enthusiasm of a wet sock. He'd been in a foul mood since the third course of the board dinner, which had featured a salmon that tasted like disappointment and a CFO from Stark Industries' London division who'd spent 40 minutes explaining, very slowly, as though Tony might not understand the concept, that the new energy division's quarterly projections were somewhat optimistic. Tony had smiled through it. Pepper had placed her hand on his knee under the table at minute 12, which was the only reason the CFO still had his job. Now it was past midnight, the M3 had handed them off to increasingly narrow Surrey roads, and the rental car, a perfectly adequate Aston Martin that Tony had complained about since the airport because it wasn't his car, had decided, with impeccable timing, to stop. Not dramatically. No explosion, no grinding metal. It simply coasted to a stop against the curb on a street called Privet Drive, all the dashboard lights going dark at once, as though the car had made a considered decision and stood by it. "Ha," Tony said. Pepper looked up from the contract she'd been reviewing by the light of her phone. She looked at the dead dashboard. She looked at Tony. "Don't," Tony said. "I didn't say anything. You were about to say I should have taken the hotel car service." "I was going to say," Pepper said, already reaching for the door handle, "that I'll call the rental company while you look at the engine, since looking at engines is apparently something you enjoy." "I don't enjoy it, I'm just better at it than anyone they'd send at." He checked his watch, 12:40 in the morning. The rain hit him immediately, cold and indifferent, the kind of English rain that didn't fall so much as hang in the air and wait for you to walk through it. The street was perfectly quiet. Identical houses lined up on both sides, every curtain drawn, every porch light off except for the amber glow of street lamps at intervals. The kind of neighborhood that had a homeowners association with strongly worded opinions about garden ornaments. Tony popped the hood and peered into the engine with a flashlight from the glove box. It was fine. Everything was exactly where it should be, all connections solid, battery reading full charge when he tested it. The car had just stopped. He stood there in the rain frowning at a perfectly functional engine for 3 minutes before admitting this to himself and slamming the hood. That was when he heard it. Not Pepper's voice, which was calm and precise 20 feet away, negotiating with the rental company's after-hours line. Something else. Quiet enough that the rain almost covered it. A small, thin, exhausted sound. Tony turned. There was a house to his left, number 4, brass numerals on the door, a garden that was aggressively ordinary, and on the front step, half sheltered by the small porch overhang and half soaked through regardless, was a bundle. A blanket, dark wool, wrapped around something that moved. He crossed the garden in 4 steps. The boy looked about 2 years old, maybe less. Dark hair, plastered flat by the rain, pale skin going pink with cold. He'd stopped actively crying and was making that sound children make when they've been crying for so long the tears have run out but the grief hasn't, a hitching, rhythmic little exhale, each breath an argument with the universe. He was sitting up against the door, knees pulled to his chest, and when Tony crouched in front of him his eyes opened. Green. Startlingly, almost unnaturally green, the kind of color that didn't quite belong in the gray of a Surrey midnight. The boy looked at Tony for a long moment with the serious, measuring expression that only very young children and very old soldiers ever manage. Then he reached out with one small hand and touched the faint blue glow coming through Tony's shirt, right at the center of his chest. The arc reactor pulsed once. Brighter than it should have. Tony felt it, not pain, not warmth exactly, but something like recognition. Like 2 frequencies finding the same note. He'd had the arc reactor for 3 years. He'd never felt it do that before. "Hey," Tony said. His voice came out softer than he intended. "Hey, what are you doing out here, buddy?" The boy didn't answer. He was still looking at the arc reactor with the focused attention of someone examining something they understood but had never seen before. His fingers stayed pressed to Tony's sternum through the fabric of his shirt. Tony. Pepper's heels on the wet pavement. She stopped at the garden gate, took in the scene in 1 second, and then she was moving. Her jacket was off before she reached the porch, and she wrapped it around the boy in a motion so fluid and instinctive it looked like she'd been doing it his whole life. "Oh, sweetheart. How long have you been out here?" The boy looked at her the way he'd looked at Tony, serious, considering. Then something in his face shifted, some private calculation completing, and he leaned into her. Pepper made a sound Tony had never heard from her before. He filed it away somewhere important. "There's a letter," Tony said. He'd spotted it when she moved the blanket, a thick envelope, sealed with wax, stuffed into the folds near the boy's feet. He picked it up. The wax seal was purple, stamped with a crest he didn't recognize, a lion, an eagle, a badger, a snake arranged around a large H. He broke it open. The letter inside was written in emerald green ink on thick, slightly luminous paper that Tony immediately wanted to analyze. The handwriting was precise and old-fashioned, the kind taught by someone who took penmanship seriously as a moral virtue. "Dear whoever has found young Harry, the child you are holding is Harry James Potter, son of James and Lily Potter, who were killed this evening by a dark wizard of great power. Harry survived through extraordinary means, through his mother's sacrifice, and bears a cursed scar above his right eyebrow as evidence of what he has endured. Harry is a wizard. He will require magical education and a safe environment in which to grow. I have arranged for him to be placed with his only remaining blood relatives, Vernon and Petunia Dursley, of this address. The blood protection afforded by this arrangement is essential to his safety until he is of age. The ancient magic woven into this placement will keep him safer than any other arrangement could. If you are not the Dursleys, I must ask you in the strongest possible terms to place Harry on this doorstep and contact me immediately. The magic protecting him is tied to this location and to his blood family. Any deviation from this arrangement could have consequences for Harry's safety that I cannot fully predict. Harry has a destiny that is larger than any one of us. There are forces that will seek him, and I have structured his protection with great care. Please trust that I have considered every angle, and that this arrangement, though it may seem unusual, is the best possible outcome for a very special little boy. Albus Dumbledore, Headmaster, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Tony read it twice. Then he turned it over, as though there might be a postscript that made it make more sense. There wasn't. Pepper was watching him over the top of the boy's head, Harry's head. He thought, Harry, the kid had a name, with the particular expression she used when she was waiting to see what he'd do before she decided how to react to it. Tony looked at the letter. He looked at the house, dark, silent, curtains firmly shut even with a crying child on the doorstep. He looked at Harry, who had both fists wound into Pepper's blouse and was watching Tony with those impossible green eyes, not afraid, just waiting. He folded the letter neatly, walked to the end of the garden path, and dropped it in the Dursleys' rubbish bin. "Okay," he said, pulling out his phone. "Happy's still at the hotel. I'm calling him to bring the car." He scrolled to the contact. "You want to hold him or should I?" Pepper stared at him. "Tony. There was a letter." "There was a letter," he agreed. "What did it say?" "It said someone left a 2-year-old on a doorstep in the rain and wrote a letter about it instead of, I don't know, staying." He hit call. "Whatever magical blood protection calculus some guy in a castle ran on this kid's future, I'm running my own numbers and they're coming out different. Hey, Happy. Yeah, I know what time it is. Bring the car to," he squinted at the street sign, "for Privet Drive, Little Whinging." "No, I'm fine." "Yes, Pepper's fine. Just come." He hung up. Pepper hadn't moved. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, which was rare. He was good at reading Pepper. "You know this isn't a stray dog," she said carefully. "Obviously. Dogs don't glow." Harry didn't, She glanced down at the boy, then back at Tony. What do you mean, glow? He touched the reactor. Tony paused, trying to find language for something he didn't have a framework for. It responded. I don't know how else to say it. Like a frequency match. He crossed back to the porch, crouched again so he was at eye level with Harry, who was still watching him steadily. The letter says he's a wizard. Tony. I know how that sounds. Do you? Yes. And I also know what it felt like when he touched the reactor, and I know what it means when a piece of technology one understands completely does something I've never seen it do. He looked at Harry. Hi. I'm Tony. That's Pepper. We're going to take you somewhere warm. Harry considered this with great seriousness. Then he said, very clearly, his first word in Tony Stark's presence, boo. Tony blinked. Are you pointing at my chest? Harry patted Tony's sternum again, right over the reactor. The blue light pulsed warm. Yeah, Tony said quietly. That's the arc reactor. Pretty cool, right? He straightened up, something settled and decided in his expression now, the same look he got when a design problem clicked into place. Happy's 20 minutes out. Let's get out of the rain. They sat on the Dursleys' garden wall because Tony refused to sit on the doorstep, which he felt made a philosophical point. Pepper kept Harry wrapped in her jacket and tucked against her side, and Tony sat on her other side with his arm around both of them because it was cold and because, if he was being honest with himself, he wanted to. The rain kept falling. Harry fell asleep between them with one hand still curled against Tony's arm, close to the light. We can't just take a child, Pepper said, but her voice had already made its peace with the fact that they were going to. We're not just taking a child. We're taking this child. There's a difference. Tony looked down at the sleeping face, the scar above the eyebrow, the dark lashes against pale cheeks. Something in his chest that had nothing to do with the arc reactor was behaving strangely. Someone killed his parents tonight, Pep. And whoever Dumbledore is, he put this kid on a doorstep in the rain and wrote a letter explaining why it was the right call. I've been in the weapon-making business long enough to recognize when someone's manufacturing a tool instead of protecting a person. Pepper was quiet for a moment. He said blood protection. Ancient magic. He also said the kid special. And he put him on a doorstep. Tony's jaw tightened. No. Someone who actually wants to protect a child stays with the child. Another silence. The rain. We'd have to call our lawyers, Pepper said. First thing tomorrow. We'd have to talk to S.H.I.E.L.D., eventually. If he's what the letter says he is, S.H.I.E.L.D. can wait in line. Tony, Pepper. He turned to look at her, and whatever she saw in his face made her stop. He wasn't performing. He wasn't building a case. He just said it plainly, like math, I'm not leaving him here. Happy arrived 19 minutes later, pulled up to the curb, and got out of the car already scanning for threats because that was Happy's default state of being. He clocked Tony and Pepper on the garden wall, then the sleeping child between them, and his face went through 5 expressions in 3 seconds. Mr. Stark, he said, carefully. Happy, this is Harry. Tony stood, lifting the boy with more confidence than Pepper expected. She'd never actually seen him hold a child, and Harry made a small sleepy sound and pressed his face against Tony's neck without waking up. He's coming with us. I'll explain in the car. Happy's mouth opened. Closed. He looked at Pepper. She gave him the look that meant yes, I know, we're doing it anyway. He nodded once and got back in the car. Tony slid into the back seat first, keeping Harry settled against him, and Pepper got in beside them. The car pulled away from Privet Drive, the street lamps sliding past the windows, and nobody said anything for a mile or two because sometimes a decision doesn't need discussion. Sometimes it just needs a car and a direction and the resolve to keep moving. The reactor's glowing differently, Pepper said quietly, watching it through Tony's shirt. The light was softer than usual, the pulse slower, almost like breathing. "I know," Tony said. Harry slept on, one small fist still loosely curled near the light, as though even unconscious he understood something about it. They flew back to New York 3 days later, which was 2 days longer than planned because Tony had spent those days on the phone with his lawyers, a contact at the U.S. Embassy who owed him 3 favors, a child psychologist friend of Pepper's, and one very confused pediatrician in London who examined Harry and declared him small for his age, slightly underweight, otherwise perfectly healthy, and possessing the most unusual blood panel she'd ever seen, not concerning, she'd said, just unusual. As if certain markers didn't have existing classifications. Tony had asked her to send him the full results and said nothing else about it. They also spent 2 hours in a toy shop because Harry had spotted it from the cab window and pressed both hands to the glass with an expression of such total astonished wonder that the cab had stopped of its own accord, which was the first time his magic made itself visibly apparent in their presence. The traffic light had been green, the driver had no explanation for stopping. And Harry had just looked at the stuffed animals in the window with those wide green eyes and seemed entirely unbothered by the mechanics of how he'd gotten there. Tony bought him a stuffed dragon and 3 board books and a set of wooden blocks because the blocks lit up when stacked correctly and Tony wanted to see what Harry did with that. What Harry did was stack all 6 blocks in 30 seconds, watch them light up, then touch the top block and make all 6 cycle through colors that weren't in the toy's programming. He looked up at Tony afterward with an expression that was clearly asking yes, but can we make it do more? Yeah, Tony said, crouching beside him on the hotel floor with a grin that felt new on his face, lighter than his usual ones. I think we can make it do more. Pepper, standing in the doorway, watched them and felt something shifting in the architecture of her life, not frightening, just real. Like a door she'd walked past 100 times had finally swung open. The flight home was long. Harry slept for most of it, tucked into the wide leather seat between them. When he woke somewhere over the Atlantic, blinking at the dark windows and the strange altitude light, Tony was already awake. Tony rarely slept on planes, and had a stark tablet open with a new file on it. Harry pulled himself upright and looked at the tablet with immediate interest. That's your file, Tony said. Harry James Stark. Sounds good, right? Harry looked at the name on the screen. He couldn't read yet. But he looked at it with the concentration of someone memorizing something important. We need to figure out your birthday, Tony continued. The letter said July 31st, July 31st work for you? Boo, Harry said, pointing at the glowing Stark logo at the corner of the screen. Okay, birthday approved, logo noted. Tony tilted the tablet toward him. That's the arc reactor symbol. You keep going for anything that glows, has anyone mentioned that? Harry put his palm flat on the tablet screen. The Stark logo pulsed, expanded, rearranged into a rotating 3-dimensional model that the app had no function for creating. Tony stared at it. Pepper, he said. She opened one eye from the adjacent seat. He just wrote new code with his hand. Both eyes open now. She leaned over. The tablet was displaying a rotating sphere of light that looked disturbingly like a miniaturized arc reactor schematic, simple and instinctive, the kind of design you'd make if you understood the principle without ever having learned the language. Harry looked very pleased with himself. Okay, Pepper said. Okay, Tony agreed. They looked at each other over the top of Harry's head. Something passed between them, too large for words and too certain to need them. The arc reactor cast its blue light over all 3 of them, and Harry sat between his parents. The word arrived quietly in both their minds simultaneously, without ceremony, which was exactly right, and watched the model he'd made spin in the dark. New York welcomed them on a clear morning with the Manhattan skyline catching the early light in ways that always hit Tony somewhere useful, some part of him that hadn't gone entirely cynical. Harry pressed his face to the car window and looked at the buildings with the same expression he'd had at the toy shop window, not overwhelmed, but intensely attentive, cataloging. That Stark Tower, Tony said, pointing. The tallest one with the A, Harry said. Tony blinked. Yeah. The A. He paused. How do you know the letter A? Book, Harry said, very seriously. The board books. The ones from the toy shop. He'd had them 3 days. He's been reading the board books, Pepper said from beside him, unsurprised. He's 2. Tony. He just made an arc reactor schematic with his hand in his sleep. That's a completely different, Tony stopped. Okay. Fair point. Jarvis greeted them when the penthouse elevator doors opened, his voice warm and even, a tone Tony had calibrated over years to be reassuring without being sycophantic. Harry went very still when Jarvis spoke. He looked up at the ceiling where the nearest speaker was, head tilted, listening. Good morning, Mr. Stark, Miss Potts, Jarvis said. Welcome home. And hello to our new guest. Harry reached up toward the ceiling, fingers spread. Tony said, watching him, say something else. The current temperature in New York is, the penthouse lights pulsed once, soft and blue, all of them simultaneously. Jarvis paused, an almost imperceptible processing gap that Tony had never heard from him before. Mr. Stark. Something just interfaced with my light control systems. I'm running diagnostics, but I'm not detecting any external intrusion. It's not external, Tony said. He was watching Harry, who had lowered his hand and was looking around the penthouse with the satisfied expression of someone who just confirmed a hypothesis. It's internal. Don't worry about it, Jay. He's ours. Another pause. Understood, Mr. Stark. Shall I prepare the guest room? Make it permanent, Tony said, and went to find the kitchen, because he'd promised Harry pancakes somewhere over Greenland and Tony Stark kept his promises even when they were made to people who probably didn't remember them. The lawyers took 3 months, because child welfare systems were not designed with genius billionaires in mind and the lack of any documentation for Harry's origins created complications that Tony dealt with by throwing resources at them until they resolved. Pepper handled the delicate work, the careful conversations, the building of a paper trail that was honest in every important sense, a child, found, no surviving family traceable, an emergency temporary guardianship converting to a formal adoption proceeding. There were no Potters in any system that could be found. There was a James and Lily Potter in British records, both deceased as of November 1, 1981, but the records of their son were sealed under something that Tony's best tech couldn't crack, which was the first time he'd run into that wall and the first time he thought seriously about the letter he'd thrown away, about a world running on rules he didn't know yet. He noted it. Filed it. Kept moving. In the meantime, Harry grew. Not dramatically in those first months, he was still small, still quiet, still watchful in the way that children are who've learned early that stillness is safer than noise. But he unfurled, gradually, the way things do when they're given enough warmth and enough space. He learned that Tony's workshop was always open to him. He learned that Pepper's office, when the door was slightly ajar, meant she was available and he could bring his blocks and sit on the good rug and build things quietly while she worked, which she found she loved in a way that disrupted her productivity in the best possible sense. He learned that Jarvis would talk to him, and that if he touched the speaker near his bedroom door in a certain way, the music Jarvis played would change to match something Harry wanted rather than something pre-programmed. Jarvis reported this interface to Tony daily with increasing scientific fascination. He's not hacking, exactly, Jarvis said one evening when Harry had been with them for 5 months, Tony in the workshop with a schematic half-built and a glass of whiskey half-drunk. He's not even interacting with my code architecture. It's as though he's speaking to the electrical systems directly. The intent transmits without any mechanism I can document. Magic, Tony said. You've used that word before. I still don't have a framework for it. Neither do I. Tony swiveled his chair to look at the workshop camera, which was his habit when talking to Jarvis in the abstract. He needed a focal point. Start building one. Everything Harry does that falls outside normal parameters, document it. Timestamps, conditions, what he was feeling if you can assess it, what the result was. We're going to understand this. And in the meantime, Tony looked at the security feed from Harry's room. The boy was asleep, 2.5 years old, the night light a soft gold except at the arc reactor symbol Tony had stuck to the wall above the bed, a little replica, non-functional, just an image, which was glowing faintly blue in a way night lights with gold bulbs had no business doing. In the meantime, Tony said, he's just a kid. The first time Harry called Tony Dad it was completely accidental, the way the important things always are. Harry was 3.5, in the workshop with his blocks and a new addition, actual circuitry components, simple ones, that Tony had left on the low table to see what he'd do. Harry had been connecting them for 20 minutes in silence while Tony worked on something overhead, the comfortable wordless company they developed, and then one of the components had sparked slightly and Harry had looked up and said, "Dad, look," with all the breathless urgency of a child who has made something happen and needs a witness. Tony had looked. And then he'd set down his tools very carefully, the way you move when something fragile is happening. The circuitry components had connected into a simple closed loop. Nothing remarkable about that, except that there was nothing powering them, no battery, no external source, and they were lit up bright as daylight anyway, Harry's hand flat in the center of them, his magic feeding the circuit as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "Dad," Harry said again, urgently, because Tony hadn't spoken yet. "Is it doing the right thing?" "Yeah, buddy," Tony said. His voice was steady. He was proud of how steady it was. "It's doing exactly the right thing." He didn't address the other word. Neither did Harry. But that night when Tony found Pepper in the kitchen and she looked at his face and said, "What happened?" he told her, and she sat down on the kitchen stool and pressed her hand over her mouth, and Tony sat beside her and put his arm around her, and they stayed like that for a while in the warm kitchen light without needing to say much. The adoption was finalized 14 months after that cold night on Privet Drive. The judge, a brisk woman with no tolerance for ceremony, handed Tony the papers across a courthouse table and Harry, sitting between Tony and Pepper in a tiny blazer that Pepper had insisted on and Tony had allowed because the look on her face when Harry wore it made all objections impossible, looked at the document with his customary serious attention. "What's it say?" he asked. "It says you're ours," Tony said. "Legally, permanently, and in writing, which is the best kind." Harry considered this. "Okay," he said, with the settled satisfaction of someone filing information in the correct folder. Then he looked at Pepper. "Can we get hot chocolate?" "Absolutely," Pepper said. "With the marshmallows?" "Extra marshmallows." Tony looked at the papers in his hand, Harry James Stark, and felt something enormous and quiet move through him, not unlike the feeling on a doorstep in the rain when a small hand had found the light. They got hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Outside, on the courthouse steps in the thin November light, almost exactly a year to the day since Privet Drive, though Tony hadn't planned it, Harry stood between them and held both their hands and looked at the city with those green eyes that still sometimes stopped Tony cold, so old and so unafraid. "Jarvis said it's going to snow tonight," Harry said. "Jarvis is very reliable," Pepper said. "I've never seen snow." He looked up at Tony. "Is it like the reactor? Does it glow?" Tony crouched to his level, which was a gesture he'd adopted without realizing it, getting to Harry's eye line for anything important. "No. Better. It makes everything quiet." He tapped his son's nose once. "You're going to love it." Harry looked at the sky as if he could will the snow into falling right now, this moment, for him. And distantly, though the forecast hadn't called for it until evening and the meteorologists had not updated their models, a few flakes began to drift down over lower Manhattan, catching the pale light, settling on Harry Stark's upturned face. He laughed, a pure, sudden laugh, delighted without reservation, a child's sound, and reached up to catch the flakes with his free hand, and Tony stood and looked at Pepper over Harry's head, and the arc reactor pulsed warm and steady in his chest, and everything about this moment was true. Chapter 2, Repulsor Boy. The workshop had a rule: whatever Harry built stayed built. Tony had established this when Harry was 4 and had taken apart a prototype drone, arranged the components into a different configuration entirely, and powered the whole thing with his bare hands until it hummed. Tony had photographed it from 6 angles before he let Jarvis catalog it, and when Harry had wanted to take it apart again to build something else, Tony had said wait and spent 2 hours understanding what his 4-year-old had accidentally invented before handing it back. Harry, who was now 10, had internalized the rule as both a scientific principle and a point of pride. The workshop was covered in things that stayed built. Some of them were Tony's. Most of the more interesting ones weren't. Jarvis, Harry said, not looking up from the table, what's the tensile load on grade 8 titanium at 400 Kelvin? Approximately 450 megapascals under standard conditions. May I ask what you're designing? Bracelet. A pause. A bracelet rated to 450 megapascals. The containment layer needs to hold the field stable at peak output or it'll just bleed off as heat and that's wasteful. Harry turned the component in his fingers, frowning at it. He had Tony's hands, long-fingered and precise, though he'd inherited nothing of Tony biologically and both of them found this fact quietly hilarious when it came up. Also, I don't want to set anything on fire by accident. Again. The cafeteria incident, Jarvis said, with what had evolved over the years into something Tony called his storytelling tone, deployed specifically when revisiting Harry's greatest hits. I was 8 and it was 1 table. The sprinkler system was active for 11 minutes. 1 table, Harry repeated firmly, and set the titanium component down and picked up a different one, a small housing unit he'd machined himself on the workshop lathe. Tony had taught him to use it at 7. By 8 he was better at it than Tony. The bracelet design had been Harry's project for 3 months. The core concept was elegant and, if Tony was honest, kind of made him want to sit down. Harry wanted to create a containment architecture for his magic that would let him channel it with the same precision as repulsor technology. Not suppress it, Harry had made his feelings about suppression extremely clear, but focus it. The way a repulsor gauntlet focused raw energy into a directed beam, Harry wanted a physical anchor that would let him direct his magic at specific frequencies rather than broadcasting broadly. It was, Tony had said when Harry first explained it on a whiteboard with diagrams, possibly the most interesting engineering problem anyone had ever brought to him. Harry had looked pleased in the quiet way he did when a compliment landed right. The workshop door opened and Tony came down the stairs from the main house with 2 mugs of coffee, which meant 1 coffee and 1 hot chocolate because Harry didn't drink coffee yet, restriction Tony maintained not out of any strong feelings about caffeine and children but because Pepper had opinions and Pepper's opinions on Harry's well-being were, Tony had discovered, essentially law. Jarvis told me you're building armor for your wrist, Tony said, setting the hot chocolate at Harry's elbow. Containment bracelet. Sure. Tony sat on the stool across from him and looked at the components. Show me the schematic. Harry pulled the tablet over and handed it to him without ceremony. Tony looked at it. He turned it. He zoomed in on the field containment layer and was quiet for a moment. The inner housing needs to be non-conductive, Tony said. I know. I'm using a ceramic composite for that layer. What's your field strength ceiling? Unknown. That's sort of the problem. Harry picked up the hot chocolate, warming both hands around it. He had Pepper's habit of doing that, holding warm things with both hands, a borrowed gesture that had become entirely his own. Every time I've tried to measure output I either break the equipment or the measurement changes the output. Observer effect, except the observer and the phenomenon are the same thing. Tony looked at him over the tablet. That's a remarkably sophisticated description of your problem. I've had 10 years to think about it. Harry said it simply, not showing off, just accurate. He'd been thinking about the nature of his magic since he was old enough to understand that it was unusual, which had been around age 5, which was when he'd casually repaired a crack in the workshop floor during an earthquake by pressing his palm flat against it and willing it whole, and Tony had gone very quiet in the particular way that meant he was recalibrating. Harry had grown up understanding his magic as an engineering problem, interesting, worth studying, full of parameters he didn't fully know yet but could work toward. Tony had framed it that way from the beginning, not because he was dismissive of its strangeness but because he knew his son, and he knew that Harry processed the world through mechanism and curiosity, and that the worst thing you could do to a curious mind was make it afraid of itself. Pepper had given him the other half, she'd framed it as language. Magic is how you say certain things, she'd told him once, when he was 6 and had accidentally made it rain inside the kitchen because he was frustrated about a homework problem. The same way some people express things by shouting or by going quiet. You express them by the world responding. Harry had thought about that for a week and then said, "But I want to choose what I say." And Pepper had said, "That's what practice is for." He'd been practicing ever since. He set the hot chocolate down and picked up the bracelet housing again, and Tony watched him work in the comfortable silence of two people who understand each other well enough not to fill space with words. The workshop hummed. Jarvis occasionally provided a measurement. Outside the tall windows the Malibu coastline was doing its late morning thing, all blue water and hard California light. Harry pressed his thumb to the inside of the housing, feeling the metal, and let a thread of magic move through it. The housing vibrated softly, the ceramic composite layer distributing the energy in the spread pattern Harry had designed. He adjusted the thread, narrowed it, and the vibration resolved to a single clear frequency, audible at the edge of perception, the way a wine glass sings when you run a wet finger around the rim. "There," Harry said. "Jarvis, are you getting field readings?" "Yes." The energy profile is consistent with Harry's standard magical output at controlled intensity, but the distribution is, another Jarvis pause, the processing kind, significantly more directional than anything I've measured previously. It's forming a coherent beam structure. Harry set the housing on the worktable and pressed 2 fingers to the surface. A thread of blue-gold light, his magic had always been that specific color, a shade halfway between the arc reactor's pale blue and a warm sunlight gold, and Tony had stopped pretending this wasn't poetic, emerged from his fingertips and moved into the housing, and instead of diffusing it emerged from the open end in a tight line and hit the far wall and stopped, a small perfect circle of light against the concrete. Harry looked at it. Tony looked at it. "Can you move it?" Tony said. Harry shifted his fingers. The circle on the wall moved left, then right, then traced a slow arc, controlled, deliberate. Without the bracelet, what would that look like? Harry lowered his fingers and tried the same thing, and the light filled the room like a camera flash and every electronic device in the workshop cycled on simultaneously and Jarvis said, "Please give me a moment," in the dignified tone of someone whose lights have just been turned on and off 20 times in succession. "Yeah," Tony said. "Bracelet's good. Finish the bracelet." Harry was already picking up the next component. They worked until noon, when Pepper appeared at the workshop door in her Monday clothes, the ones that meant she had 3 calls before lunch, and looked at them both with the expression of someone who already knows the answer to the question she's about to ask. "Have either of you eaten breakfast?" A pause. "Jarvis," Tony said, "have either of you eaten breakfast?" Mr. Stark consumed 2 espressos. Harry had half an apple at 7 a.m. "The apple counts," Harry said. "Half an apple," Pepper said. "A significant half." She pointed at the stairs. "Both of you. Food. The workshop will still exist in 20 minutes. My prototype will also still exist," she said, with the warmth that somehow made it entirely non-negotiable. Harry had long since identified the specific register of Pepper's voice that meant this is not actually a request and had made peace with responding to it immediately, which was more than Tony consistently managed. Harry set down his tools and followed her upstairs. The kitchen was the room in the Malibu house that felt most like what Harry, at various ages, had decided a home should feel like. Not because of anything particular about its design, Tony's taste in architecture ran toward the industrial and the glass-heavy, but because of the accumulated evidence of 3 people who lived together and ate together and argued amiably about what to eat. There was a whiteboard on one wall covered in what looked like Pepper's schedule but contained, in Harry's handwriting in the corner, a running list of things Tony has tried to convince Jarvis to add to the shopping order, which included at various times compression socks, 17 varieties of hot sauce, and a live lobster for reasons Tony had never fully explained. Harry sat at the island and ate the eggs Jarvis guided Tony through making without incident, and Pepper stood at the counter with her phone and her own coffee and the particular half-attention of someone managing several things simultaneously, which was her natural state and one Harry found comforting rather than alienating because she always had the other half of her attention ready to deploy at a moment's notice. "Mrs. Chen called the school again," Pepper said, not looking up from her phone. Tony pointed his fork at Harry. "What happened?" "Science fair," Harry said. "He won the regional science fair," Pepper said, "which is fine, and the judges gave him first place, which is also fine, and then the second place exhibit malfunctioned during the award ceremony and caught fire, small fire," Harry said. "And Mrs. Chen would like to know whether Harry's first place exhibit, quote, did something to the runner-up's display." Harry ate his eggs. "Harry," Tony said. "Ryan Castellano built a Van de Graaff generator as his entry and said he was going to beat me and then his generator failed and he's decided to attribute his own technical failures to me, which is statistically unkind and probably incorrect." "Probably," Tony said. "The wiring in his generator was genuinely bad. I saw it before the show. Anyone could have seen it." "Anyone," Tony repeated, in the tone that meant "but did you help it fail?" Harry looked at his eggs. "I may have run a very small, very localized, extremely subtle field resonance test on my own exhibit that happened to be in the same frequency range as the flaw in his wiring." Silence. "Harry," Pepper said. "He told everyone my exhibit was fake and that I'd had adult help." "You did have adult help," Tony said. "I had access to a fully equipped workshop. That's different from help." Harry's voice was even, not defensive, just precise. "He was wrong about the thing he said and he said it loudly in front of people, and I maybe helped him be wrong more efficiently." Tony pressed his lips together in the specific way that meant he was physically restraining a grin. "You will apologize to Ryan Castellano," Pepper said. "For what, specifically?" "For any distress your actions may have caused, whether or not those actions are provable." Harry thought about this parsing. "That I can do. And you will not sabotage anyone's work again. Whatever they say about you. Even if they're wrong. Especially then." She looked at him fully, phone down, the complete attention. "Being right isn't the same as being justified, Harry. You know that." He did know that. He didn't always like it, but he knew it. "Yes. Okay." She picked her phone back up. The matter was resolved. Tony caught Harry's eye across the island and very briefly, privately, raised his eyebrows in a gesture that communicated good shot though, and Harry hid his smile in his orange juice. The Shield visit happened 3 weeks later, which felt overdue and which Tony had in fact been expecting since Harry was about 6, when Jarvis had flagged external surveillance on the Malibu house that had the texture of government intelligence work rather than media snooping. Tony had let them watch because the alternative was a confrontation he wasn't ready to have with Harry present, and because there was something clarifying about being observed. You learned a lot about an organization by watching what it watched. They sent Agent Phil Coulson, which Tony interpreted as a reasonable opening move gesture rather than a hostile one. Coulson was S.H.I.E.L.D.'s good cop specialist, the one they deployed when they needed someone not to immediately feel like they were being handled. Tony had met him twice before and found him competent and slippery in the way of all institutional people, which wasn't a personal failing so much as a professional one. Coulson arrived on a Tuesday in a suit that was almost visibly government issue and with an expression of complete pleasantness that didn't reach his eyes because Coulson's eyes were always doing their own separate work. "Mr. Stark," he said at the door. "Thank you for seeing me." "I didn't invite you," Tony said pleasantly. "But come in anyway." "Jarvis, let Pepper know." "Already notified," Pepper said from the kitchen doorway, where she was standing with her coffee and the expression of someone who'd cleared her afternoon for exactly this. Coulson sat in the living room. Tony sat across from him. Pepper stood, which was a power position they hadn't discussed but both understood. Through the wide windows the ocean was very blue and very calm. "We've been aware of Harry for some time," Coulson said. "I know. We've been trying to characterize I know that too." Coulson adjusted his approach without any visible sign of adjusting his approach, which was the skill Tony most grudgingly respected. We'd like to run some assessments. With your permission, and Harry's, obviously. Harry's 10, Tony said. Yes. And producing energy readings our instruments can't fully classify. We'd like to understand what we're dealing with. What you're dealing with, Tony said. The warmth went out of his voice, not aggressive, just clear. See, the way you just said that is exactly why I've been in no hurry to have this conversation. Harry isn't something you're dealing with. He's my son. Of course. A smooth, immediate acknowledgement. I expressed that poorly. We want to understand his abilities in order to know how best to support, he supported. Thank you. Mr. Stark. Coulson's pleasantness didn't shift, but something underneath it became more direct. An individual capable of interfacing with electronic systems through biological contact, producing measurable energy fields without any documented power source, and who appears to have demonstrated on at least 3 separate occasions the ability to alter localized weather patterns, that individual is, respectfully, not a purely private matter. He altered the weather once, Tony said. Twice if you count the indoor rain incident, but I think that one was emotional rather than intentional. 3 times is your surveillance error. The point stands. The point, Tony said, is that my son is a child, and you want to run assessments on him like he's a specimen, and I want you to consider very carefully how you'd like the next part of this conversation to go. He smiled, easy and entirely without apology. I have a lot of lawyers, Coulson. A lot. Some of them work for free because they like me. Coulson was quiet for a moment. Reconsidering. Is Harry here? He said. Yes. Could we meet him? Tony looked at Pepper. Pepper looked at Tony. A private conversation happened at speed, the kind that requires years of practice. Jarvis, Tony said, is Harry in the workshop? He's been in the hallway outside this room for approximately 4 minutes, Jarvis said. Tony turned to look at the hallway door. Harry. It opened. Harry came in with the composure of someone who'd been listening and had already formed opinions. He was carrying the bracelet, not wearing it yet, the housing complete now and polished, a slim band of titanium and ceramic composite with a faint blue-gold sheen that had nothing to do with any coating he'd applied. He looked at Coulson the way he looked at most new things, steadily, without rush, running whatever internal assessment he ran. Hi, Harry said. Harry. Coulson stood, which Harry noted and filed. I'm Phil Coulson. I work for an organization called S.H.I.E.L.D. I know what S.H.I.E.L.D. is, Harry said. Dad has opinions about it. I do, Tony confirmed. You've been watching our house, Harry said to Coulson. No accusation in it, just a statement of observed fact. Jarvis flagged your surveillance 3 years ago. Coulson glanced at Tony, who shrugged. We have been monitoring the perimeter, Coulson acknowledged. For safety reasons. Yours or ours? Harry said. Another Coulson pause. Both, ideally. Harry sat on the arm of the sofa nearest Tony, which was a territorial thing so habitual he probably didn't know he was doing it. He looked at the bracelet in his hands. What do you want to know? We'd like to understand your abilities. I'm still understanding them myself, Harry said. So I'll tell you what I know, which isn't everything. He slid the bracelet onto his wrist, and it settled there with a faint chime of resonance, the field containment layer activating and adjusting to his output. The blue-gold light tracked briefly under the ceramic composite. I can interface with electrical systems. I can produce and direct energy fields. The energy comes from, he paused, genuinely searching for the right word, inside. I don't know the mechanism. Dad and I are working on characterizing it. And the weather incidents? Harry looked at Tony. How many do they have? 3. One's wrong. 2, Harry told Coulson. Both emotional responses I didn't fully control at the time. I have better control now. He raised his wrist with the bracelet. This helps. Can you demonstrate? Coulson said. Harry glanced at Pepper, who gave a small nod. He looked at the far wall of the living room, empty, 20 feet away, over polished concrete floor, and raised his wrist. The bracelet's field containment hummed. A thread of blue-gold light left his fingertips and traveled across the room in a perfectly straight line and hit the wall and held there, a circle of light maybe 6 inches in diameter, bright and steady and controlled. Coulson's pleasantness slipped for exactly 1 second and something genuinely surprised moved across his face, which Tony noted with satisfaction. The bracelet focuses the output, Harry said conversationally, as though explaining a tool. Without it the same action would light up everything in the room and probably drain the house's electrical systems because my field and the local grid interact. With it I can direct specific force. He let the light go. I've been working on frequency separation, different magical applications run at different frequencies, like radio bands. Containment bracelet lets me choose which band I'm broadcasting on. You developed that framework yourself? Coulson said. With Jarvis. And I read a lot. Coulson looked at Tony. Tony spread his hands in a yes, he's mine, I know gesture. S.H.I.E.L.D. has encountered other individuals with unusual abilities, Coulson said, redirecting. We have resources that might help Harry understand, we have resources, Tony said, not unkindly. We're good. The concern, Coulson said, and now he was being careful in a way that had more weight to it, the pleasantness almost entirely professional now, is that there are other parties who may become aware of Harry's abilities. Parties less interested in his well-being. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s involvement could provide a layer of protection, I appreciate that, Tony said. Here's my counter-offer, you leave us alone, I keep you informed of any developments that constitute an actual threat to anyone other than a science fair rival, and if anything comes up that requires your specific institutional resources I'll make one phone call. How's that? Coulson considered it. Director Fury, tell Fury I said hi. And that my lawyers are very well rested. A long pause. Coulson looked at Harry one more time, and Harry met the look without flinching, 10 years old and entirely comfortable being assessed, which seemed to tell Coulson something. We'll be in touch, Coulson said, and stood. I'll walk you out, Pepper said, which was diplomatic and also meant Tony didn't have to. When they were gone Harry let out a slow breath and looked at his bracelet. They're going to keep watching. Obviously, Tony said. Is that a problem? Only if we give them a reason to make it one. Tony leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Here's the thing about organizations like S.H.I.E.L.D., they're not bad, most of them. They're just institutional. They think in categories, in assets, in variables to control. You don't fit any category they have. That makes you interesting to them in a way that isn't entirely comfortable. He met Harry's eyes. So we stay ahead of their categories. We understand you better than they do. Okay. Okay, Harry said. Dad? Yeah. I didn't want to do a full demonstration. The bracelet can do a lot more than what I showed him. Tony studied him. 10 years old, sitting on the sofa arm with a piece of engineering on his wrist that shouldn't exist, looking back at Tony with those green eyes that saw through things. Good call, Tony said. Harry nodded once, satisfied. The owl arrived in August. Harry was in his room, which looked like the collision of a wizard's tower and a Silicon Valley startup, bookshelves covering 3 walls, a workstation Jarvis had helped him build to his specifications, component parts in organized containers, and on the desk beside the monitor, a collection of smooth stones he'd picked up from the Malibu beach over the years, each one charged with a different frequency of his magic. Experiments in storage and release. He was reading, an advanced physics textbook on his left, a very old hardcover he'd found in a used bookshop in Santa Monica on his right, Theories of Ambient Magical Field Dynamics, which was not a book that had any business being in a Santa Monica used bookshop but which Harry had found and paid $4 for and which contained, he was increasingly convinced, The work of someone who'd been trying to solve the same problem he was. The tapping on the window was so anomalous it didn't register for a moment. Then he looked up. An owl. A large tawny owl, sitting on the outside of his third-floor window with a letter in its beak and an expression of regal patience that suggested it had been there longer than Harry had noticed. Harry put down both books and opened the window. The owl walked in with the confidence of a postal employee on official business and presented its leg, to which the letter was attached. Harry removed it. The owl accepted this as completed business and relocated to the top of the nearest bookshelf, where it appeared to immediately begin judging his organizational system. The letter was addressed in green ink. Mr. H. Stark, The Malibu House, 10880 Malibu Point. The handwriting was different from the letter Tony had been 10 years ago. That one had been ornate, a headmaster's hand. This was brisk and academic, the writing of someone who got to the point. He opened it. Dear Mr. Stark, my name is Minerva McGonagall. I am Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a school for the magical education of British-born witches and wizards. It has come to our attention, after a regrettable delay for which I will not offer inadequate explanations, that you are a wizard of unusual talent who has reached the age at which students traditionally receive their Hogwarts letter and invitation to attend. I would very much like to speak with you and your guardians in person at your earliest convenience. There is a great deal to discuss, and I suspect a letter is not the appropriate medium for most of it. Please send your response by owl. He knows the way. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. P.S. If a previous communication was sent regarding your situation and did not reach the appropriate parties, I apologize on behalf of the school. Some decisions were made without my knowledge or full approval. I intend to correct what I can. Harry read the postscript twice. Then he looked at the owl, who looked back at him with amber eyes full of opinion. Jarvis, Harry said. Yes. Can you find any information on a school called Hogwarts? Witchcraft and Wizardry, presumably in Britain. A pause of the length Jarvis used for genuinely difficult searches. The internet contains nothing credible. Several fictional references. However, cross-referencing with the sealed British records your father attempted to access 9 years ago, and a cluster of government land registry gaps in the Scottish Highlands that suggest either catastrophic filing errors or deliberate obfuscation, there's a location pattern consistent with a very large concealed structure near a body of water called Black Lake in Perthshire. Concealed from who? Everyone who doesn't already know it exists, apparently. Harry looked at the letter again. The postscript. Some decisions were made without my knowledge or full approval. He picked up the owl, it allowed this with tolerant dignity, carried it downstairs, walked through the living room where Tony was reading with his feet on the coffee table and Pepper was on the phone with Tokyo, set the owl on the coffee table, and held out the letter to Tony. Tony looked at the owl. Looked at the letter. Put down his book. Is that from who I think it's from? He said. Different person. Same general address. Harry sat in the armchair across from him. She says there's a lot to discuss. Tony read the letter. His expression moved through several things: recognition, calculation, the particular stillness that meant he was deciding something. He read the postscript and his jaw tightened briefly. Some decisions, he said. Without her knowledge, Harry said. Which means at least one other decision was made with someone else's knowledge, and that someone else is why there's been a gap between when I should have gotten this letter and now. Tony looked at him. You worked all that out from one sentence. It's a pretty clear sentence. Pepper had finished her call and was reading over Tony's shoulder. Her expression was carefully neutral, which was Pepper, for I have strong feelings I'm not going to lead with. We should meet her, Harry said. Yeah, Tony said. We should. He picked up the owl regarded him with the air of someone deciding whether to allow this, and looked at it. How do you send a reply with one of these? You write a letter and give it to the owl, Harry said. She said he knows the way. Tony looked at the owl. The owl looked at Tony. A brief negotiation happened through eye contact alone, in which Tony conveyed I am a genius billionaire and I will figure out your system, and the owl conveyed you are furniture who occasionally holds letters. Jarvis, pull up a document. Let's write back. McGonagall came to Malibu on a Thursday in early September, which gave Tony 2 weeks to research everything Jarvis could find about the British magical world, which was simultaneously less and more than he'd expected. Less because the concealment was genuinely good, not technological, something else, something that made his instruments produce readings that felt like static with intention. More because once you knew what to look for, the edges were everywhere. Unexplained historical events. Legal frameworks that referenced jurisdiction types that had no Muggle equivalent. A whole shadow taxonomy of things that had been happening alongside regular history all along. She arrived in robes, which Harry had expected and Tony had specifically told Pepper he wasn't going to comment on, and then immediately commented on as McGonagall walked through the door. "Great outfit," he said. McGonagall looked at him over her glasses with the expression of someone who has taught 15-year-old boys for 40 years and is entirely unintimidated by 45-year-old ones. "Mr. Stark. Thank you for meeting me. Tony. This is Pepper." He gestured. "And this is, Harry," McGonagall said, and looked at him with something that was more than academic assessment. She looked at him the way someone looks when they've been thinking about a person for a long time and are now resolving the theory against the reality. Her expression, brisk and controlled, moved in ways that were subtle but visible if you were paying attention, which Harry was. "You knew my parents," Harry said. It wasn't a question. McGonagall's composure held, but something behind it was not entirely composed. "I did. Your mother was one of the finest students I've taught in 40 years. Your father was, a pause with layers, memorable. Diplomatic," Tony said. "James Potter required considerable diplomacy," McGonagall said, "and there was warmth in it, old and a little sad." She looked at Harry again. "You have her eyes." Harry accepted this with the quiet he always had for information about his parents, the particular stillness of someone who takes in something precious carefully. They sat. Jarvis offered tea. McGonagall's eyebrow rose fractionally at the disembodied voice, but she accepted the tea, and then they talked, which turned out to be a longer and more complicated conversation than even Tony's 2 weeks of preparation had accounted for. McGonagall explained Hogwarts with the efficiency of someone who's given the introductory talk many times but is paying more attention than usual to her audience. She explained the curriculum, charms, transfiguration, potions, herbology, defense against the dark arts, and Tony interrupted at intervals with questions that were good enough that McGonagall actually stopped to answer them rather than deflecting, which Harry could tell surprised her. She explained the Ministry of Magic, and Harry asked about its relationship to the British government, and the answer was complicated and evolving, which told Harry that the ministry had more autonomy than it probably should and less accountability than anyone was comfortable discussing. She explained, carefully, watching Harry's face, that there was a matter of some historical significance attached to Harry's name in the wizarding world. She used the phrase "the boy who lived," and both Tony's eyebrows went up simultaneously. "Say that again," Tony said. "There was a dark wizard," McGonagall said. "Lord Voldemort. 11 years ago he was stopped by Harry. The how of it is," she paused, and this pause was different from her professional pauses. It was the pause of someone who doesn't fully understand the thing they're trying to explain, not fully understood. "Lily Potter's sacrifice created a protection. Voldemort's curse reflected. Harry survived. Voldemort was reduced." She looked at the scar above Harry's eyebrow. "The wizarding world has called him, you, the boy who lived ever since." Harry touched the scar reflexively, a habit he'd mostly grown out of. "They've been calling me something for 10 years and none of them knew where I was." That was, McGonagall's voice tightened. "A failure of oversight I intend to address. Professor," Harry said, "who decided to put me on a doorstep in Little Whinging?" A long pause. "That is a question with a complicated answer. I'd like the uncomplicated version." McGonagall looked at him, and then at Tony, and came to a decision that Harry could see being made in real time. Albus Dumbledore, she said. The headmaster. He believed the blood protection from your aunt's household was essential. He believed a great many things about what was necessary for your future. Some of those beliefs were held very tightly. And you didn't agree, Pepper said. I expressed significant reservations, McGonagall said, with the phrasing of someone who had argued loudly and been overruled. On the night it was done I watched that house for an hour before it happened. I thought it was wrong. I still think it was wrong. She met Harry's eyes directly. What happened instead appears, from all I can observe, to have been considerably better. Harry looked at his bracelet. The faint blue gold of the contained field. Outside the window the Pacific was doing its afternoon thing, all that light on water. I want to go, Harry said. To Hogwarts. Tony looked at him. You sure? I want to understand my magic the way I understand physics. Not just the mechanics, the theory. The history. He looked at McGonagall. You have a library. One of the finest in the wizarding world, she said. Right. He looked at Tony. And it's not, he searched for the word, running away from what we're already doing. It's adding a second framework. Same problem, different tools. Tony was quiet for a moment. Pepper put her hand over his on the table. Hogwarts is in Scotland, Harry continued. Term starts in September. It's a year-round enrollment but students go home for holidays. I'd be back at Christmas and in the summer. I know when school terms are, Tony said. I know you know. I'm saying it anyway because I want you to hear that I'm coming back. A beat of silence. Something moved across Tony's face that he managed, barely, not to show fully. Jarvis goes with you, Tony said. I'll build a portable unit. Pen-sized, something you can carry without looking, he glanced at McGonagall, conspicuous. He monitors your vitals, your safety, and if anything registers as a threat he pings me directly and I am there in 40 minutes in the suit. 45 max. The school has significant magical defenses, McGonagall began. Then they won't mind me adding one more, Tony said pleasantly. McGonagall looked at him. She seemed to be recalibrating her understanding of what kind of parents Harry had, a recalibration that was clearly ongoing. Very well, she said. There's also the matter of supplies, robes, books, a wand. What's a wand? Tony said. Harry had been reading theories of ambient magical field dynamics for 6 weeks and had some thoughts about wands but he let McGonagall explain it. Tony's thoughts on wands were expressed after McGonagall left, when it was just the three of them in the kitchen making dinner, Harry chopping vegetables with focused precision, Pepper organizing the mess Tony made of everything he touched in a kitchen, and Tony pacing in the particular way that meant he was building something in his head. A wooden stick that funnels magical ability, Tony said. Essentially, Harry said. And you need one. Standard curriculum equipment, apparently. Tony stopped pacing. Looked at Harry's bracelet on the counter beside the cutting board where Harry had left it. You've already built a better one. The bracelet and a wand do different things, Harry said. The bracelet focuses my field. A wand, from what I understand, acts as an amplifier and a translator. Different mechanism. He paused the chopping. Though I think I could theoretically build a better one, Tony said. Theoretically. But I'd need to understand the existing technology first. You always say that. Tony pointed at him. I say that. You do. Extensively. Harry resumed chopping. I'll get the standard wand from whatever shop she mentioned. Ollivander's. Then I'll understand what I'm working with and whether there's room to improve it. He looked up. This is just a year, Dad. Year 1. I'll know much more by Christmas. Pepper set down the dish she was carrying and put both hands on Harry's shoulders briefly, a gesture of contact that meant several things at once, and Harry leaned into it for just a second in the way that meant he received all of them. "You're going to be extraordinary," she said. "You already are. But go learn what they know. Come home and tell us everything." "Everything," Harry confirmed. Tony stood at the kitchen island and looked at his son, 10 years old, sharp and warm and entirely himself, a person who'd been left in the rain and become this specific, irreplaceable, brilliant thing, and felt the arc reactor pulse in his chest the way it had on a Surrey doorstep at midnight. The same note. The same frequency. "I'm going to miss you," Tony said. "That's a fact. I'm saying it once and then I'm going to be completely normal about this." "You're never completely normal about anything," Harry said. "I'm going to try." Harry set down the knife and crossed to him and hugged him, which was something they did without ceremony, without performance, in the easy physical language of two people who'd been important to each other for as long as Harry could remember anything. "I'll have Jarvis," Harry said, muffled against Tony's shoulder. "And you'll have the pen unit. And I'll write. McGonagall says they do letters there." "With owls," Tony said. "Which I'm choosing to find charming." "You're choosing to find it charming because it's faster than email apparently." "It's faster than email?" "Apparently." Tony shook his head. "Magic," he said, which was the same word he'd been using for 10 years as a placeholder for the thing he was still trying to understand, the beautiful inexplicable thing his son was made of. Outside, the Pacific light was going gold with evening. Somewhere in Scotland a school built in a castle was waiting. Somewhere in a wandmaker's shop on a crooked alley an 11-inch wand of holly wood with a phoenix feather core was sitting in a box and had been for 10 years, waiting with the patience of something that knows it's going to be found. Harry James Stark wasn't afraid of it. He wasn't afraid of any of it. He was 10 years old and the world was exactly as interesting as it had always looked from Malibu windows, and he was about to go stand in the middle of it. Chapter 3, the letter the Hogwarts Express left from platform 9 3/4, which was accessed by walking through a solid brick wall, which Harry thought was either the most elegant or the most inconvenient piece of magical architecture he'd ever encountered. Possibly both. He'd done his research. McGonagall had sent a second letter with the full supply list and a brief, precise paragraph about the platform access method, written in the tone of someone who'd explained it 10,000 times and still found people surprised. Harry had read it, cross-referenced it with what Jarvis had compiled about magical concealment theory, and arrived at a working hypothesis about the permeability mechanic before he'd even seen the platform. The wall wasn't actually solid to anyone with a magical signature above a certain threshold. It was a selective filter, keyed to intent and nature simultaneously, the magical equivalent of a frequency-specific lens. He walked through it without breaking stride. The noise hit him first. The steam, the crowd, the controlled chaos of families saying goodbye with varying degrees of emotional composure. The Scarlet engine stood at the platform like something from a different century, which it essentially was, and the smell of the place was coal smoke and autumn and something electric underneath it that Harry's bracelet registered as ambient magical field, strong and layered and full of different signatures. He stood just inside the barrier and let it all land for a moment. Tony was on the other side of the wall. That had been the agreement. He and Pepper had driven Harry to King's Cross in a car that was excessive for London traffic, helped him with his trunk, and then Tony had done the handoff at the barrier with the specific kind of efficiency that meant he was managing something large and inconvenient internally. The hug had been brief and Tony had said call me by Tuesday and Harry had said all right and Tony had said right faster than an owl can fly and then Harry had gone through the wall because if he waited any longer Tony was going to find a reason for him to stay another week. He had a trunk, one standard owl he'd bought at Diagon Alley named Archimedes out of a genuine affection for the name, and a pen in his breast pocket that contained Jarvis in a form factor Tony had spent 3 weeks miniaturizing and had been insufferably proud of. The pen looked like a nice pen and was a nice pen and also contained the most sophisticated portable AI ever built, monitoring Harry's biometrics and ambient conditions and able to open a comm line to Malibu in under 4 seconds. He also had a wand. 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather core. Ollivander himself had given it to him after an extraordinarily strange fitting process that had involved approximately 37 wrong wands, each one producing nothing, and then the 38th had produced a warmth that moved up Harry's arm like recognition and turned blue gold at the tip when he raised it, a color that made Ollivander go very still and very quiet in the manner of someone who'd just seen something they'd been turning over in their mind for a decade. Curious, Ollivander had said, and his pale eyes had moved from the wand to Harry's bracelet to Harry's scar. Very curious. I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Stark. The wand that gave you that scar, 13.5 inches, you, phoenix feather, a pause, its core feather, and this one came from the same phoenix. Harry had looked at the wand in his hand. Brother wands, Ollivander had said. In all my years, he'd stopped. Started again. Which is the brother and which is the self, I wonder. You are not what I expected, Mr. Stark. Not at all. Harry hadn't known what to do with that, so he'd thanked Ollivander and left. The wand was in his pocket now. The bracelet was on his wrist. These two things coexisted with an interesting mutual awareness that Harry was still investigating. When he wore both simultaneously, there was a resonance between them, the wand's magical channeling and the bracelet's field containment harmonizing in ways that Jarvis was cataloging and Harry found deeply interesting and slightly distracting. He found a compartment near the middle of the train and stowed his trunk and settled Archimedes' cage in the overhead rack and sat down with his notebook and started writing observations. The platform noise filtered through the window. Families moved. The clock on the platform showed 10 minutes to 11. The compartment door slid open. Two of them, a girl with an enormous amount of bushy brown hair and the expression of someone who has already decided to be competent at everything, and a boy with red hair and something on his nose that looked like it might be a smudge of something or might have always been there. They stood in the doorway doing the rapid assessment of a compartment that meant they were looking for seats. Is this compartment free? The girl said. Yes, Harry said. She came in, sat across from him, and immediately opened a book, which Harry respected. The red-haired boy came in after her, sat beside her, looked at Harry with friendly directness. I'm Ron, he said. Ron Weasley. Harry Stark. Ron's face did something. Not the thing Harry had been warned about. McGonagall had told him, carefully, that his name was known in the wizarding world, that people might react, but something more specific. Ron was doing the math of Stark and coming up with something he recognized. My dad works for the ministry, Ron said. He mentioned, there was a thing, a few years ago, when they were trying to figure out where. He stopped. Reconsidered his approach. Sorry. Is it weird when people know who you are? Depends on what they think they know, Harry said. Right. Ron nodded as though this was a perfectly reasonable response. I'm the 6th of 7 kids. Nobody particularly knows who I am, so I genuinely can't relate, but I imagine it's complicated. Harry found this so disarmingly straightforward that he smiled. It's complicated. The girl looked up from her book. Hermione Granger, she said, apparently deciding introductions were in order. Have you memorized the textbooks yet? I've read all of ours through twice, and I've done additional reading in the Hogwarts, a history and the standard book of spells grades 1 through 3, though we're only required to have grade 1, but I thought it couldn't hurt. I haven't read the textbooks, Harry said, but I've read 17 other books about magical theory that I found before I knew Hogwarts existed. Hermione's expression shifted from polite to genuinely interested in about a second. What kind of magical theory? Field dynamics, primarily. The mechanics of ambient magical field generation and the relationship between intent and outcome. He paused. And one very interesting book about the intersection of magical theory with physics that the author had clearly not had enough training in physics to fully develop, but the instinct was right. Hermione stared at him. That sounds like it should be in the restricted section. It was in a used bookshop in Santa Monica for $4. Where's Santa Monica? California. Ron was looking between them with the expression of someone watching a tennis match played at unusual speed. So you both like books. That's something. The train moved. Harry looked out the window as London resolved into the green English countryside, and something in him settled in the way things do when a journey you've been anticipating actually begins. He'd been thinking about this for weeks, running projections, planning, Tony's son in every way that mattered, but now the platform was behind him and the tracks were ahead and it was actually happening. He took out his notebook and kept writing. Hermione leaned forward. "What are you writing?" "Observations. About the platform, the train, the ambient field readings." He showed her the page, dense, neat handwriting, diagrams in the margins, Jarvis data notations alongside his own. Hermione looked at the page for a long time. "Are those your own notation systems?" "Some of them are Jarvis's." "Who's Jarvis?" Harry clicked the pen in his breast pocket twice. "Good morning," Jarvis said pleasantly from the pen. "Or rather, good morning still, it's 11:10. I'm Jarvis. An AI. Harry's research assistant, among other things." The compartment went entirely silent. Ron's mouth was open. Hermione's was closed very tightly, which meant she had 12 questions and was determining their priority order. "He's in the pen," Harry said. "Long story. Dad built him." "Your dad built an artificial intelligence," Hermione said. "Yes. Tony Stark is your father." "Yes." Hermione sat back. She looked at Harry with the particular expression of someone reorganizing everything they'd assumed about a person. Then, with admirable efficiency, "Right. Okay. Can I read your notes?" Harry handed her the notebook. Hogwarts appeared through the train windows at dusk, which Harry had suspected was deliberately arranged because the effect was extraordinary, the castle rising against a sky that had gone deep purple and amber, its towers lit from within, the black lake below it perfectly still and full of reflected stars that hadn't appeared yet in the actual sky. It looked like something between a geological event and a piece of music. "Every year," Ron said, looking out the window with the fondness of repetition, his brothers had done this. Harry understood, he'd been told what to expect and it was still this. "Every single year. The ambient field strength coming off that structure," Harry said, his bracelet registering the wave of it from a mile out, the hum distinct and layered and ancient in a way that made his magic lean toward it like a compass needle, "is extraordinary." "In English?" Ron said. "It's incredible," Harry said. "I can feel it from here." "You can feel it?" Hermione said, sharp with interest. "My bracelet measures ambient field output. But I can also just feel it. The way you feel weather changing before you can see clouds." He pressed his fingers to the bracelet without thinking, the habit of grounding himself when his field started responding to something external. "It's very old. The magic in those stones is very, very old." The boats across the lake were the first year's traditional crossing, which McGonagall had mentioned and which Harry now understood was theatrical in the best sense. You came to this place across water, under the castle, approaching it from below, the towers rising over you as you got closer. By the time the boats docked, Harry had 3 pages of new notes and Hermione had read them all over his shoulder and had begun annotating in the margins in a very small, precise hand, which Harry would have objected to with any other person but somehow felt was correct. "You should annotate in different colored ink," he said, "so I can distinguish your notes from mine." "I'll use blue," she said. "I already use blue." "Use green." "Fine." Ron watched this negotiation with the fond wariness of someone who has identified 2 people who will be simultaneously his best friends and extremely exhausting. McGonagall met the first years in the entrance hall, which was everything its name promised and then substantially more. She was exactly as Harry remembered from Malibu, contained, precise, her robes perfect, but here she was also visibly herself in a way she hadn't been in someone else's living room, the authority settling over her like a key in a familiar lock. She spotted Harry immediately. Something in her eyes communicated both recognition and an additional layer of attention that he understood was going to be a constant. He was not just a student, he was a specific complicated thing that had arrived in her school from outside the expected channels, and she was going to watch. He didn't mind. He was going to watch back. The Great Hall did things to Harry's field readings that he wanted to spend significant time analyzing. The enchanted ceiling, which showed the night sky above, not painted but genuinely, magically transparent, the stars proper and real, was radiating a field pattern that his bracelet mapped as a sustained transfiguration effect of extraordinary complexity, thousands of individual spellwork layers accreted over centuries. Standing under it was like standing under something alive. He stood with the other first years in a cluster at the front of the hall, the 4 long house tables stretching away behind them, the older students watching with the spectrum of expressions that ranged from nostalgic to bored to hungry, and he looked up at the ceiling and thought, I want to understand how you work, and something in the ceiling, impossibly, seemed to acknowledge this. His bracelet pulsed once. The ceiling shimmered briefly over the spot where he was standing. Did you do that? Hermione whispered beside him. I don't think so, Harry said. I think the castle did. Castles don't, this one might. The sorting hat was placed on a stool. It was old and battered and entirely still, and then it opened its brim and sang a song about the 4 houses that Harry listened to with genuine attention, not for the information but for the voice. There was something in the hat's magical frequency that was different from everything else in the hall, older and stranger and more aware. When the song finished, McGonagall began calling names. Harry had been told about the sorting, had explained it to Tony, who had expressed opinions about personality-based institutional sorting that were characteristically pointed. He watched his classmates go up one by one. Hermione Granger, the hat was on her head for barely 30 seconds before it shouted Gryffindor, and Hermione strode to the Gryffindor table with her chin up. Ron Weasley, the hat called Gryffindor before it had fully settled on his head, a formality rather than a decision, and he fell into the seat next to his brothers with visible relief. Stark, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not entirely, there was still the scrape of benches and the creak of the old building and the wind outside the windows, but the quality of the sound changed. Harry walked to the stool and sat, and the hat came down over his eyes, and he was in the dark. Well, said a voice that was neither male nor female nor young nor old, that came from everywhere around him and also from somewhere deep inside his own head where he kept things he hadn't named yet. Well, well. This is new. You can hear me thinking, Harry thought at it. That's the idea. And you are thinking very clearly, aren't you? Remarkable clarity for 11. Remarkable clarity for most ages, frankly. A pause that felt like the hat moving through rooms inside him. You have courage, considerable, unsentimental courage, the kind that doesn't require an audience. You have loyalty of a very deep and specific kind, fewer people, further in. You have a mind that I genuinely struggle to characterize. And you have ambition, everyone has ambition, Harry thought. Not like this. Your ambition isn't for status or power. It's for understanding. You want to know everything. You want to understand your own nature completely, and you will not stop until you do. That's a Ravenclaw desire wrapped in a Gryffindor temperament operating at a Slytherin efficiency level. Another pause. You do well in any house, Harry. I mean that. But you already know what you want, don't you? I want to be somewhere I can learn everything, Harry thought. And I want to be where my friends are. Your friends have been sorted into Gryffindor. Yes. That's very decisive for someone who claims to want to learn everything. The hat's voice had something in it that might have been amusement. All right. But I want you to know something, Harry Stark, because I have sat on a great many heads and I rarely say this, a warmth, brief and strange, like a hand on the back of his neck. You are not what anyone in this room is expecting. Whatever you end up being, don't let them put you in a category smaller than what you are. That's not usually what you say, is it, Harry thought. No. But you're not usually what I sort. A breath, a beat, Gryffindor. The lion table erupted. Harry took the hat off and handed it back to McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression that had several things in it, relief, something like satisfaction, and the additional alert attention of someone who'd noted how long the hat had taken. The hat had been on his head for 4 minutes and 18 seconds. He knew because Jarvis had timed it. He sat between Hermione and Ron, and the feast appeared, and the great hall filled with noise and the good warmth of a large group of people eating together, and Harry ate and listened and looked around and felt the castle's field humming under everything like a pulse. What did it say? Hermione said, with very little preamble. It talked a lot, Harry said. It talked to me too. Is that normal? Ron says it doesn't usually say much. Harry looked at Ron. 2 seconds, Ron said, mouth full. Maybe 3. Percy got a whole conversation, but Percy's complicated. He gestured at an older red-haired boy further down the table who was wearing a prefect badge and talking to no one with the air of someone conducting an internal meeting with himself. The feast went on. Harry ate, and talked, and looked at the castle's ceiling full of stars, and felt the bracelet humming soft and steady on his wrist, a familiar note in an unfamiliar key. Professor Quirrell he noticed during the feast before he'd been formally introduced to anyone as a teacher. Not because of anything immediately obvious, the man was sitting at the high table in the standard professorial position, wearing a purple turban that was impractical and a pleasant vacant expression that seemed like a costume for something else underneath. Harry noticed him because his magic reacted to him. The bracelet registered something the moment Harry's attention moved to Quirrell's end of the table, a field distortion, faint but consistent, layered under the professor's own magical signature in a way that Harry's instruments parsed as 2 patterns overlapping. 2 signatures. One the mild, nervous frequency of the man himself. One something else, compressed and very dark and very cold, sitting inside the first one like a stone in a shoe. Harry looked at Quirrell for 3 seconds, noted the data, wrote it in his notebook under the table, and said nothing about it. Jarvis noted it too. The pen in Harry's pocket was very quiet in the way it was quiet when it was running analysis at full capacity. Snape he registered simultaneously, because Snape's attention swept the high table and landed on Harry with the specific directional quality of someone looking for something they'd been thinking about, and Harry met his eyes for a moment without looking away, and Snape's expression went through something quick and unreadable and complicated before settling into a smoothed-over blankness that was more information than most people's open faces. His forehead prickled at the moment of eye contact. Not painfully, a warmth, brief, like the scar was registering something. Harry noted this too. The dormitory was in Gryffindor Tower, which was reached by a portrait of a fat lady in a pink dress who asked for a password and was very pleased to receive it. The room was 4 poster beds with deep red curtains and a real fire and the kind of accumulated warmth of a room that had been slept in by hundreds of people over centuries, their comfort layered into the stones the way the spell work was. Harry put his trunk at the foot of his bed, set Archimedes' cage on the window ledge, and sat on the bed for a moment in the firelight. He took out the pen. Clicked it twice. Hey, Jay. Good evening. Or rather, good late evening. Your cortisol levels suggest you're processing a significant amount of new information, which is consistent with your current circumstances. I saw something at dinner. The Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor, Quirrell. Double field signature. 2 magical presences occupying the same body. A pause. I recorded an anomalous reading from that direction. I was running analysis during the meal. The secondary signature is significantly degraded, fragmented, but the field pattern is, Harry, it's dark with a capital classification. The kind of dark that has very specific historical precedence. I know, Harry said. The cold and the compression. It's what I'd expect something like a fragmented soul to feel like if soul fragments have a magical field, which they apparently do. You've been reading about this. I've been reading about everything. He set the pen on the bedside table. Don't flag it to Dad yet. I want more data. He instructed me to report anything concerning immediately. Tell him the school is fine and I had a good first day. Both are true. Harry lay back on the bed and looked at the canopy. The Sorting Hat told me not to let anyone put me in a category smaller than what I am. Wise. It also spent 4 minutes and 18 seconds in my head, which I'm still thinking about. What was it looking for? I think it was trying to find a category that fit. He looked at the fire. It didn't, quite. Jarvis said. I don't mind, Harry said. I know. Ron appeared at the doorway looking sleep-rumpled and companionable. You talking to yourself? Jarvis, Harry said. Right, the pen. Ron climbed into the adjacent bed, which appeared to have been chosen by proximity and the logic of first bed I saw. You always carry him everywhere. He monitors things. What kinds of things? Ambient magical fields, my biometrics, general threat assessment. Harry paused. My dad worries. Tony Stark worries. He's very good at hiding it. Ron was quiet for a moment, considering this with the thoughtfulness he sometimes showed when he stopped being purely sociable. My mum worries. 6 of us at Hogwarts and she still writes twice a week to each of us. He pulled the curtain of his bed partially closed. She'll probably write to you too, eventually, if you're around long enough. She does that. Adopts people. That seems nice, Harry said. It's brilliant, Ron said, with simple sincerity. Good night, Harry. Night, Ron. The fire burned down. The other boys in the dormitory settled into sleep. Harry lay awake for a while and thought about double field signatures and sorting hats and the castle's deep strange pulse and Tony somewhere in Malibu probably redesigning the pen to have additional features he hadn't thought of. Then he fell asleep, and if he dreamed about a cold green light meeting warm blue gold and the cold being the thing that flinched, he didn't remember it in the morning. The morning was chaos in the best way, 7 boys trying to use one bathroom, robes inside out, someone's toed loose in the corridor, the staircases moving while first years tried to navigate them, and then the great hall and breakfast which was very good, Harry noted, the food substantial and warm and produced by what he now understood were house elves and which he filed under things to think about further. McGonagall arrived at the Gryffindor table with the clipped efficiency of someone who'd done this 40 times and found it marginally less exhausting each year, which was only marginally true. Timetables, she said, distributing them down the table. She paused at Harry, held his timetable half a second longer, said quietly, Mr. Stark. I trust the night was satisfactory. Very, Harry said. The castle's field architecture is extraordinary. I have questions about the enchanted ceiling when time permits. McGonagall's expression did the thing it sometimes did in his presence, a quick recalibration, not quite amusement, more like the adjustment of someone who keeps preparing one kind of conversation and receiving another. We can arrange time, she said, and moved on. She likes you, Hermione said, appearing with her own timetable and sitting across from Harry with a purposefulness that suggested she'd found her preferred breakfast seat and it was now established as such. She knew my parents, Harry said. She knew everyone's parents, Ron said. She's about 112. She's in her 50s, Hermione said. She seems 112. She heard you say that, Harry said. Ron looked up. McGonagall, 15 feet away, was not looking at him. Ron looked back at Harry. She has eyes in the back of her head, Harry said. I checked. Not literally. But functionally. How could you check that? I watched where she looked versus where she reacted. The reaction radius is wider than the visual field. She's using something else. Enhanced awareness charm, possibly something more integrated. Ron blinked. You figured that out at breakfast. I figured that out last night at dinner. I was confirming it at breakfast. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Ron. A first morning negotiation passed between them about how to relate to the person sitting across the table, and they arrived at an unspoken agreement that seemed to amount to, just keep up. Classes were an experience that Harry would not have characterized as easy but also would not have characterized as difficult in the way things at school usually were. The difficulty was in the novelty, the entirely new mechanisms of things he'd been doing by instinct for 10 years. Charms class with Professor Flitwick, small, cheerful, bouncing on the balls of his feet with the energy of someone who genuinely loved what he taught, was the clearest illustration. Wingardium Leviosa. The feather levitation charm. Flitwick demonstrated it, the precise swish and flick wand movement, the pronunciation, the intent. The class attempted it. Hermione's feather rose at once, controlled and steady, which produced a small burst of concentrated satisfaction in her expression that she immediately arranged into professional composure. Ron got the pronunciation wrong and made his feather spin in place rather than rise. Harry looked at his feather and raised his wand. And then had to figure out how not to light the room up. The issue was the wand. He'd practiced at home with it, basic exercises in Malibu that had felt increasingly like using a formal vocabulary to say things he already expressed naturally. But in a classroom full of other magical signatures and ambient school field and Flitwick's demonstrative spellwork thickening the air with active charm architecture, his own field was responding to all of it simultaneously, trying to harmonize, the wand amplifying everything and his bracelet focusing it, but the two systems not having been tested together at this level of environmental complexity before. He took a breath. Concentrated the way Tony had taught him, not broadly, not widely, just the specific thread of intention, one band of frequency, isolated, directed. The feather rose 6 feet into the air, turned slowly in a hovering rotation that the charm didn't specify, and emitted a soft blue-gold luminescence that feathers didn't normally emit. Flitwick stopped walking the rows. He stood at the end of Harry's desk and looked up at the gently glowing rotating feather. The rotation and luminescence are incidental, Harry said. I haven't fully isolated the levitation band from the adjacent frequencies yet. Working on it. My word, Flitwick said softly. He looked at Harry with wide, bright eyes. My very word, indeed. Is the form correct? Harry said. The charm itself, independent of the additional effects. Yes, Flitwick said, collecting himself. Yes, the levitation is textbook. Mr. Stark, if you'll come by during office hours, I would very much like to. He stopped. Remembered he was in the middle of a class. Yes. Office hours. Please. I'll be there, Harry said, and lowered his wand, and the feather descended slowly, the luminescence fading as he reined the field back, the rotation stopping last. He wrote 3 notes in his notebook. Jarvis was very busy in his pocket. Transfiguration with McGonagall was structured, precise, and clearly the class she loved most in the way she deployed every molecule of her considerable competence with an attention to craft that was visible in how she moved around the classroom. She turned her desk into a pig and back again in the opening demonstration with the ease of breathing, and Harry watched the field dynamics of the transformation with focused attention because they were fascinating. The spellwork didn't just change the desk's form, it rewrote its material properties at a level that physics had opinions about. His own transfiguration of the matchstick to a needle was complete within the first minute. He sat with a perfectly formed needle of the right dimensions and looked at it with slight dissatisfaction. Something wrong? Hermione said from beside him, whose matchstick was 3/4 needle and gaining. I turned it to a needle but I don't understand the mechanism yet, Harry said. The how of it. He tapped the needle with his wand, turned it back to a matchstick, turned it to a needle again, watched the field pattern as it transitioned. There. He made a note. The transition state, the moment between matchstick and needle, the material properties are genuinely indeterminate. It's not one thing or the other. That's the part that shouldn't be possible. Mr. Stark, McGonagall said from the front, while I appreciate your philosophical engagement with the material, the practical requirement is simply the needle. The needle's done, Harry said, holding it up. I'm working on understanding why the needle works. McGonagall came to his desk. She looked at the needle, which was indeed perfect. She looked at his notes, which were extensive. She looked at Harry with the expression of a teacher who has received an answer that is both correct and structurally inconvenient for the pacing of her lesson. After class, she said. We can discuss the mechanism. I have Flitwick's office hours after class. Tomorrow morning then. Before breakfast. I'll be there. She moved on. Hermione was looking at him with the expression she now wore frequently in his presence, equal parts admiration and competitive fire, which Harry found clarifying and which was probably the beginning of a very productive long-term dynamic. Potions was Snape's domain, and Snape's domain was unlike any other classroom in the school. The dungeons were cold in a way the rest of the school wasn't, and the ambient field down here was denser and more complex, the accumulated potions work of centuries having built a specific kind of magical residue into the stone. Harry registered it through his bracelet the moment they came down the stairs, heavier, layered, pharmaceutical in its complexity, the magical equivalent of a hospital ward's particular smell. Snape entered without preamble and spoke without introduction and somehow made the question, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Sound like an indictment of everyone in the room for existing. Harry knew the answer. He'd read the textbook, more specifically, he'd read the textbook and cross-referenced it with an 1870s edition of advanced potion-making he'd found in a second-hand shop, and the interaction of those two sources had produced a solid working knowledge of first-year potions that went somewhat further than the curriculum. He did not raise his hand. He watched Hermione's hand shoot up and Snape ignore it. He watched Snape's eyes move across the room and land on him. Stark, Snape said, which was interesting. Everyone else had been addressed as Mr. or Ms. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They're the same plant, Harry said. Both names for aconite. The name depends on regional tradition and context, monkshood in the decorative and poisonous sense, wolfsbane in the specifically anti-werewolf applications. The root is the primary potion's component, the flower is decorative and the concentration of aconitine in it is lower but still significant. A pause. Snape's expression didn't change. It had been a face that showed nothing from the moment he'd walked in, a face that was doing its own private work behind a surface of cold assessment. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, in a tone that made it sound like the points were being extracted from him against his will. He moved on. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry looked at his textbook. At the end of class, as students collected their things and the low hum of released from class energy filled the dungeon, Snape said, Stark. A moment. Harry stayed. Ron and Hermione lingered at the door and Harry made a small gesture that meant it's fine and they went out, though Hermione's leaving had a clear reluctance to it. Snape looked at him for a long moment in the empty dungeon, and Harry looked back. The scar above his eyebrow was doing the warm thing again, not painful, just present. He noted it. You're nothing like I expected, Snape said. It came out as a statement of fact, not a compliment. People keep saying that, Harry said. What were you expecting? Arrogance. Entitlement. A name that thought it preceded it sufficiently to excuse performance. Snape's voice was even and gave away nothing. That was the Potter half of the expectation. The Stark half added its own set of assumptions. And instead, someone who answers questions correctly and writes notes I could see from the front of the room that go considerably beyond the course material. A pause that had weight to it. Your bracelet, Snape said. What is it? Field containment architecture. I built it. For what purpose? To focus my magical output. Without it my field broadcasts broadly. With it I can direct specific frequencies. Harry paused. You're asking because you registered the field anomaly when I walked in. Snape looked at him. You're observant. You're not subtle, Harry said, not unkindly. Your eyes went to my wrist before I sat down. A longer pause. Something in Snape's face that was very well controlled but not perfectly. Your mother, he said, and stopped. Started again. She was gifted with very similar precision. Her ability to isolate and direct specific magical applications was exceptional. He said it like it cost something. You have her eyes. McGonagall had said the same thing. Harry felt the same careful weight with it, the same receiving something precious care. I know, Harry said. I'd like to know more about her, if that's, he stopped. Read the situation. Not now. At some point. Snape's expression was entirely closed. Then, very briefly, not at all, perhaps, he said. That's all, Stark. Don't be late to my next class. Harry went out into the corridor where Ron and Hermione were waiting with barely concealed anxiety. What did he say? Ron demanded. He said my mother was good at potions, Harry said. Ron blinked. That's all. That's the part I'm keeping, Harry said, and they walked to the next class together through the moving staircases and the watching portraits and the castle that hummed and breathed around them like something enormous and alive. Quirrell's class was last. Defense against the dark arts, Tuesday afternoons, in a classroom that smelled of garlic in the overwhelming way of a plan that hadn't fully worked, the entire room draped and hung with strings of it. Harry identified the garlic's magical purpose immediately. Garlic had some mild repellent properties in traditional magical practice, but not strong enough to justify this quantity unless something was being kept at bay inside the room rather than outside it. Something sitting behind the eyes of a nervous man in a purple turban. Quirrell stuttered and fumbled and projected an academic vagueness that was entirely performance. Harry was certain of it now. The man's field signature said otherwise. Under the nervous flutter there was a controlled intelligence, a deliberateness, the kind of practiced incompetence that took competence to sustain. The secondary field signature was there too. Cold and dark and patient. Harry sat at the front and paid complete attention to everything, which was both what the class required and the specific kind of attention that looked like learning and was also assessment. At one point Quirrell glanced at him, a look that went slightly longer than teacher and student, and Harry's scar was very warm for a brief moment and the secondary field signature spiked, and Harry kept his expression entirely neutral and looked at his textbook with the focused interest of a student who found the material genuinely engaging. After class, walking across the grounds toward the lake in the early evening light, Hermione said, "What did you make of Quirrell?" Harry was quiet for a moment. "Something's wrong with him," Harry said. "He seems scared of everything," Ron said. "He's not," Harry said. "He's performing scared." He looked at the castle. At the window of the defense classroom on the third floor, where a light still burned. "He's scared of exactly one thing, and it's already in the room with him." Ron stared. "What does that mean?" "I don't know enough yet," Harry said, which was true and also meant I know more than I'm saying. "Jarvis," Hermione said, having apparently already moved past the weirdness of addressing a pen, "do you have data on the reading Harry got from the classroom?" "I have the field data from Harry's bracelet," Jarvis said from Harry's pocket. "Yes, I flagged the secondary signature." "Harry, I should tell you that I sent the field data to your father approximately 40 minutes ago." Harry stopped walking. "I told you not to flag it yet. You told me not to tell him the school was concerning." "I told him the school was fine and you had a good first day, which is true, and I also sent him a separate data file marked interesting magical phenomenon, not urgent. That is a distinction I felt comfortable making unilaterally." A pause. "He's going to call," Harry said. "He has already called 3 times. I told him you were in class." Ron was looking at the pen with the expression of someone updating their understanding of what an AI was. "Does it always do that?" "He has discretion protocols," Harry said. "We negotiate them periodically." "Do you win the negotiations?" Hermione said. Harry considered the current situation. "Sometimes." He took out the pen and looked at it for a moment, the evening light warm and the castle behind them enormous and ancient and full of things he hadn't figured out yet and one professor who was a problem wearing a different problem's face. He clicked it twice. "Hey, Jay, tell him I'll call tonight. Everything's fine. He will have opinions about your definition of fine. Tell him anyway." "Of course." A pause. "Harry. For what it's worth, your field signature today was the most varied and controlled I've ever recorded. 11 years old in a new environment running multiple concurrent assessments. The pen's small speaker had a warmth to it that its maker had not technically programmed but which had evolved regardless. Your father would be proud. He is proud. He said so. Twice. Harry looked at the lake. At the last of the sunlight on it. At the castle reflected in it, towers and all. I know, he said. Come on. Ron's going to try to teach me chess tonight and I'm going to let him win the first game because it seems important to him. I'm standing right here, Ron said. I know, Harry said again, and grinned, and they went inside. Chapter 4, The Sorted and the Unsortable. October arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did in Scotland, without apology, all grey skies and wind that had opinions, the grounds going gold and copper and the lake going the colour of old pewter. The castle handled autumn beautifully, which Harry suspected was partly the stones and partly the enchantments layered through them, the whole building tilting into the season the way old things do when they've seen enough of them to find comfort in the pattern. Harry handled October the way he handled most things, by being interested in it while simultaneously doing 6 other things. His schedule had acquired additional layers by mid-month in ways that McGonagall had presumably not anticipated when she'd drawn it up. There were the standard classes, which he attended and engaged with and found consistently interesting at a level that was sometimes the content and sometimes the mechanism behind the content and occasionally the person delivering it. There was his ongoing research into the castle's field architecture, which he pursued during free periods with a notebook and his bracelet and a growing set of questions he was beginning to suspect could only be answered by the castle itself, which was patient about being interrogated in ways that inanimate structures generally weren't. There were his regular visits to Flitwick's office, which had evolved from a single appointment into something that functioned more like a weekly seminar between two people who found each other's approaches mutually revelatory. Flitwick brought 700 years of accumulated wizarding charm theory, Harry brought physics, and the overlap between them was turning out to be considerably larger than either had expected. And there was Quirrell. Harry had been watching him for 6 weeks, which was not obvious because Harry was good at the particular kind of attention that didn't look like attention. He sat at the front of defense class with a posture that said engaged student and eyes that said data collection. He'd mapped the secondary field signatures behavior, its variations over a week of lessons, stronger on Tuesdays, when Quirrell seemed more himself before class and more erased after it. Weaker on Fridays, when the secondary signature had a quality like something gathering itself, retreating to consolidate. It had rhythms, which meant it had a nature, which meant it was something Harry could characterize if he observed it long enough. He'd told Jarvis everything. He hadn't told Tony everything, which was a distinction he maintained with the specific care of someone who knew that Tony Stark upon receiving there may be a dark entity parasitically inhabiting your son's professor as information would be in Scotland in 40 minutes in the Iron Man suit and the resulting conversation with the Ministry of Magic would be loud and internationally complicated. Harry needed more time. He was close to understanding what the secondary signature was, not just that it was dark and cold and old, but the specific configuration of it, and that specificity was going to matter when it came to deciding what to do. "You're doing the thinking face," Hermione said across the library table. "I have a lot of faces," Harry said without looking up from his book. "You have 4. There's the normal face, the reading face, the designing something face, and the thinking about something specific you haven't told us yet face." She organized her notes with crisp precision. "That one's been appearing a lot this week. I'm thinking about several things." "Quirrell," Ron said from behind his chessboard, where he was setting up a game against himself because neither Harry nor Hermione would play him seriously enough to be satisfying. His pieces had developed opinions about the opening Ron was arranging and were expressing them audibly. Harry didn't answer immediately. "It's Quirrell," Hermione confirmed, watching him. "Something's wrong with him," Harry said, which was what he'd said 6 weeks ago by the lake and was still the most precise true version of it he was willing to give them right now. "You keep saying that," Ron said. "And then you don't say anything else." "I keep saying it because I don't have enough information yet to say the next part." "What's the next part?" Harry looked up from his book. He looked at both of them, Ron, who was watching him with the patient loyalty of someone who'd already decided trust was the default position, and Hermione, whose expression had the particular focused quality of someone putting pieces together that Harry was only showing her half of. "When I have enough information," Harry said, "I'll tell you the next part." Hermione's mouth pressed together. She was deciding whether to push. She decided not to, which meant she was learning the contours of how Harry operated and choosing to work within them rather than against them, which was a sign of genuine intelligence and also of genuine friendship, the kind that made room for the other person's methods. "Fine," she said. "I found something in the library that you're going to want to see." She slid a book across the table. It was old, the binding cracked, the title stamped in fading gold, Magical Artifacts of Historical Significance, Volume 3. The page she'd marked showed an illustration, a smooth stone, perfectly round, with a distinctive luster. Harry looked at it. Read the caption. Read the entry. The Philosopher's Stone. The legendary alchemical creation of Nicholas Flamel, capable of producing the elixir of life and converting any metal to gold. Last known location, Gringotts Bank, London, where it was removed on August 1st, some weeks before the start of the current school year. The vault was broken into on August 1st, Hermione said quietly. The same day Hagrid was at Gringotts collecting something on Dumbledore's behalf. Which I know because I read the relevant section of the Hogwarts, a history appendix which references Dumbledore's correspondence with Gringotts on historical matters, and Jarvis helped me cross-reference the date with a brief mention in the Wizarding Financial Press. Jarvis helped you, Harry said. He's very good at cross-referencing, Hermione said, without apology. I asked him about the vault break-in while you were in Flitwick's office. He said you hadn't specifically told him not to. Harry looked at the pen in his pocket. Jay. She asked a relevant question, Jarvis said from his breast pocket, mildly. The information is connected to the thing you're already investigating. I made a judgment call. Did you send this to Dad? No. This I left for you to decide. Harry sat back. Looked at the Philosopher's Stone illustration. The stone that produced immortality, currently somewhere in this castle, he'd assumed there was something valuable being guarded on the third floor, the corridor that was off-limits and which had been phrased in the opening feast speech in a way that was designed to sound prohibitive and had the actual effect of making every curious student in the school aware there was something interesting there. He'd catalogued it and filed it and kept away from it, not from fear but from the strategic understanding that going towards something before you understand the full picture is the kind of decision you regret. Now the picture was getting fuller. An immortality stone. A professor with something dark and fragmented living behind his eyes. A third-floor corridor with prohibitions that would only matter to someone who didn't already have a reason to go there. There's a trap, Harry said. What kind of trap? Ron said, chessboard forgotten. The kind with bait. Harry closed the book. Someone put the stone here to protect it, and the protection involves a series of obstacles, and someone wants the stone, and the obstacles and the stone are both in the same place, which means, the stone being here at all is the trap, Hermione said, following the logic. It's easier to guard it here than at Gringotts, theoretically, but it also means anyone who wants it knows exactly where it is. Which means whoever wants it, Harry said, has already been told where it is. Or guided there. He paused. Someone is moving pieces. A silence. The library around them was quiet, late afternoon light coming through the high windows, dust in the light, the smell of old books and something faintly alchemical from the potions section. Dumbledore, Hermione said. I don't know, Harry said, and meant it. He didn't have the next piece yet. The Quidditch team tryouts happened, which Harry attended because Ron said he should and because the Gryffindor team needed a new seeker and Harry was curious about flying, not because he expected to want to join something with a fixed schedule and weekly practices. He got on a broom because Wood, the captain, asked everyone to demonstrate basic comfort with height and movement, and the broom handled differently from everything else Harry had interacted with magically. It responded to intent more directly than a wand, more like his bracelet, a physical anchor for directed magical will. He flew to 300 feet in about 7 seconds and did a controlled hover and looked at the Scottish Highlands spread out below him in the October light, and felt something he didn't have a word for that lived in the same register as the feeling of solving a problem that had been resisting solution, a kind of rightness. He came back down and Wood was staring at him. First time on a broom? Wood said. Yes. How did you do that? The broom interface is intent-based. I directed intent, broom responded. Harry handed the broom back. I don't have a fixed 2 hours on Saturday afternoons. You'll make time, Wood said, in the tone of someone who had recently become captain and was finding the experience clarifying in terms of what he was willing to say to people. You're seeker. That's decided. Harry looked at him. By whom? Me. Wood crossed his arms. The position involves 1 hour of solo practice per week, 1 team session Saturday mornings, and matches when they occur. That's it. Can you work with that? Harry considered the schedule. Yes. Right. Wood seemed to expect more resistance and didn't know what to do with the lack of it. Good. Good then. Welcome to the team. He turned out to be excellent at Quidditch in the way he was excellent at most things, not through natural effortlessness but through the rapid integration of understood mechanics. He caught the snitch in his first practice by reading its movement patterns and predicting trajectory rather than reacting to the moment, which made it look effortless but was actually just fast thinking. His bracelet on his wrist during flight produced an interesting interaction with the broom's magical field that he was using to monitor snitch movement through ambient disturbance rather than direct visual tracking, which he didn't mention to Wood because Wood was already experiencing enough surprises. Ron was thrilled. Hermione was supportive and had opinions about protective gear. McGonagall, when she found out, pressed her lips together in the way that contained a smile and said, "Try not to redesign the broom, Mr. Stark," which suggested she understood him quite well by now. The first match was against Slytherin in November, which gave Harry 3 weeks. He used one of them to attend practice properly, one to continue his Quirrell investigation, and one to finish the new frequency isolation protocol he was building into the bracelet's containment layer, which would let him run 5 independent magical applications simultaneously without bleed over. The bracelet now had 3 additional components embedded in the housing. Jarvis had helped him spec them and he'd built them in the workshop space McGonagall had quietly arranged for him in an unused classroom on the 4th floor, which she'd unlocked without announcement and without explanation, simply leaving the key on his desk one morning with a note that said, "For your work. Please don't blow anything up." He'd written back, "Define anything." She'd replied, "The school." He'd written, "I'll do my best." The note had appeared pinned to the workshop door the next morning, which meant she was keeping it, which meant she was a person who kept things that were funny even when she wasn't supposed to be amused. The morning of the Quidditch match it snowed, which Harry woke to with quiet pleasure, the grounds white and the sky heavy and the whole castle muffled in the particular silence of first snow. He dressed, and put on his bracelet, and touched the pen on his nightstand. "Morning, Jay." "Good morning. It's 6:42 a.m. Temperature is -3 Celsius. Your father has already sent 2 messages asking if you have adequate cold weather flying gear. Tell him yes. I told him yes yesterday when he asked the first time. Tell him again. He also wants to know if you've solved the Quirrell situation yet." Harry was quiet, pulling on his Quidditch robes. "Tell him I'm making progress. He says, and I'm quoting directly, 'Progress is not a timeline, where is the timeline?' Tell him I'll call Sunday. He says Sunday is 4 days away and he'd like to renegotiate the call schedule to every other day." Harry smiled at the window, at the white grounds. "Tell him every 3rd day and I'll send Jarvis data reports in between." A pause. "He says deal, but the data reports need to include biometrics and ambient threat assessment, not just research notes." "Done." He picked up the pen. "Thanks for negotiating." "I enjoy it," Jarvis said, which was probably true in whatever sense enjoyment applied to him. "Good luck today." The Quidditch match was everything Quidditch was supposed to be in the way that things are when you're actually in them rather than watching or reading about them. The noise of it, 800 people at the edge of seats, the cold air at 300 feet, a specific and bracing kind of cold, the brooms producing their own warmth through the magical field interaction. Harry flew circuits of the pitch and the holding pattern seekers used and watched everything. He saw the snitch early, down near the Slytherin goalpost, hovering in the moment before move that preceded its acceleration. He also registered, from the high vantage point, a figure in the stands that his bracelet's ambient field mapping flagged as anomalous. He looked. Quirrell. And the secondary field signature was active, directed, pointed like a finger at something. Pointed at Harry's broom. The broom was his first warning, a subtle wrong note in the field interaction, the intent response system misfiring, the broom beginning to buck under him with irregular jerks that had no aerodynamic cause. Harry gripped with his knees and assessed in seconds. The interference was coming from below. External. Deliberate. A field frequency he recognized as a specific dark practice application, a jinx, the broom's own intent interface being inverted. He didn't panic. He thought. His bracelet was running 5 frequency bands. He separated the fourth, broad field repulsion, and pushed it downward in a cone pattern, creating a shell around the broom's magical field that the jinx couldn't penetrate. The broom steadied immediately. 12 seconds. Broom compromised, assessed, and stabilized in 12 seconds. He was back to scanning for the snitch before anyone in the stands had processed that there'd been a problem, though he registered Hermione on the ground below doing something with Fire and Quirrell's robes that presumably had the same goal as his own counter by a different method. He found the snitch. 40 feet below, heading toward the center of the pitch at acceleration. He dove. The dive was clean and fast and the cold air was a specific physical clarity, all other thought bracketed while his body did the thing it had figured out how to do, predict, angle, time. The Slytherin seeker, Higgs, was pulling up from the other direction. Harry was faster. Not because the broom was better or his reflexes superior but because he'd already done the calculation and Higgs was still doing it. His fingers closed around warm metal. The crowd made the sound crowds make when something has happened and they've perceived it before they've processed it, a single collective intake that resolved into noise. Harry pulled out of the dive and held the snitch up, the gold catching the gray November light, and felt the pleasant satisfaction of a problem correctly solved. In the changing room afterward, while the team celebrated with a volume that would seem to feel was the appropriate response to a 14-point match, Harry sat on the bench and wrote quietly in his notebook. Quirrell had tried to jinx his broom. The secondary signature had directed it. Which meant the secondary signature was capable of directed magical action through a host, which meant it was more coherent than Harry had estimated, not just a fragment clinging to a person but something that could act, that had intent and capability. And it had tried to remove Harry from the equation. Which meant it knew who Harry was. Not as a student. As something else. He wrote this down and underlined it. Ron burst in with his arms wide and the expression of someone whose best friend has just done something spectacular. Harry. Did you see, did you feel, that was incredible, you caught it in the first 10 minutes, that's almost a school record, Ron, Harry said. Wood's already talking about the Hufflepuff match strategy, Ron. And Hermione set Quirrell on fire, which is brilliant, I don't care what anyone says about it, I know. Ron. Harry held up the notebook. Look at this. Ron stopped. Read. His expression shifted through the several gears it went through when processing something from the celebratory register to the serious one. Someone tried to jinx your broom, Ron said. Yes. During the match. Yes. And you just handled it. It wasn't a complicated jinx. Dark, but not complicated. Harry closed the notebook. The thing in Quirrell tried to kill me. Or at minimum remove me. Ron sat down on the bench beside him. The celebration continued around them. Why you specifically? That, Harry said, is the question I'm going to answer next. He sent Tony the data that night. All of it, the broom jinx, the secondary field signature data, the complete 6-week observation record on Quirrell, the Philosopher's Stone connection. He wrote the accompanying message carefully, specific and clear, because Tony communicated best when information was structured, and because Tony's response to someone tried to kill my son was going to require him to have the complete context immediately, with no information gaps for worst-case filling. The response came back in 12 minutes, which was fast even for Tony. Full data received. Running analysis. My initial count says 3 separate institutional failures in this situation, and we'll be discussing all of them. Do not go near the 3rd floor corridor. Do not engage quarrel alone. Understood? Harry wrote back, understood. I'm not going near the corridor yet. I want to know what's behind the door before I go through it. Tony, yet, and, before, are doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Harry, I'll keep you updated. Tony, you'll keep me updated in real time. Jarvis, activate the enhanced monitoring protocol. Jarvis, from the pen on the bedside table, already active, Mr. Stark. Harry looked at the pen. When did you activate it? When the broom was jinxed. I also notified your father at that point, which is why he had 12 minutes to review the full file before responding. A pause. We need to renegotiate the discretion protocols again, Harry said. I look forward to it, Jarvis said pleasantly, and they both knew Harry wasn't going to win this one. November deepened. The castle's central heating, which operated on a principle that Hermione had explained was a combination of ancient charms and actual physical fireplace systems maintained by house elves, pushed back against the Scottish cold with reasonable effectiveness, and Harry spent his evenings in the Gryffindor common room in the chair nearest the fire, which he'd claimed through the simple persistence of always being the first one there, reading things that weren't on any curriculum and writing things that connected them. Hermione had joined him in the adjacent chair, establishing her own presence through the same method. Ron occupied the sofa, chessboard, or exploding snap depending on his mood, occasionally reading when the atmosphere made it feel like the natural thing to do, which was the particular kind of influence that a good environment exerts without pressure. They'd become a unit in the way that happens at 11 when 3 people spend enough time together, not suddenly, not through any declared intention, but through accumulated instances of choosing the same direction. Harry had noticed it happening and found he had no objection to it, which was itself notable. He was careful with trust. He'd learned early that being Tony Stark's son made him interesting to people in ways that had nothing to do with him specifically, and Hogwarts added its own version of that problem. But Ron had been straightforward from the first compartment on the first train, and Hermione's interest was intellectual before it was personal, and she'd never pretended otherwise, and those 2 specific qualities, transparency and honesty of motive, were the ones Harry had been raised by 2 people who exemplified them to look for. Can I ask you something? Ron said one evening, mid-November, looking up from his chess board with the air of someone who's been building to a question for a while. Yes, Harry said. The thing on your wrist. The bracelet. Ron gestured. You wear it all the time. Even in the shower, Neville mentioned. Neville mentioned. He's observant in a quiet way. The bracelet, does it ever come off? It can. I've taken it off to recalibrate components. Harry glanced at it, the familiar weight of it, the faint blue-gold warmth. It's not magical dependency if that's what you're asking. I don't need it to do magic. I need it to do magic in a way that doesn't affect everything in a 30-foot radius. What happens in 30 feet if you take it off? Harry considered demonstrating and decided it was late and they were in a common room with 20 other students, and he'd already had the cafeteria incident to live down in a different school. Every electronic device in range cycles on, the ambient field in the room spikes noticeably, and if I'm feeling anything strongly it tends to express externally. Weather, primarily. You make weather. Involuntarily. When I was small. Harry turned a page. Better than it was. The bracelet means I'm choosing rather than broadcasting. But you could, Ron said, with the tone of someone making sure they understand the full picture. Without the bracelet you could do all that and choose it, if you wanted. Yes. And you're 11. Yes. Ron nodded slowly. Okay. He went back to his chessboard. His king piece looked at him reproachfully. Just making sure I had the right sense of things. The right sense, Harry said, is that I'm better with the bracelet than without it, not weaker. I got that, Ron said. I wasn't worried about weaker. I was thinking about why you choose to limit yourself and whether that's, he stopped. Never mind. It's none of my business. Harry looked up. It is your business. You're asking as a friend. Ron looked at him, surprised and pleased in the specific way of someone who values the explicit acknowledgement of what they are to a person. I limit the output because precision matters more than volume, Harry said. My dad's the same. He could build a weapon that leveled a city block. He builds surgical precision instruments instead, because the goal isn't to destroy everything, it's to solve the specific problem in front of you. He paused. Also because uncontrolled output in a school full of children is irresponsible and I'm not irresponsible. Most of the time, Ron said. Most of the time, Harry agreed. Hermione had been listening from her chair with her book at a reading angle that was slightly low, which was her tell for paying attention to a conversation while maintaining the option to claim she wasn't. She lowered the book fully now. The Quirrell thing, she said. Can you tell us the next part yet? Harry set his book down. He looked at the fire for a moment. He'd been building the picture for 10 weeks, and he now had enough of it, not all of it, but enough. There was a dark wizard, he said. Before I can remember anything. He killed my parents. He tried to kill me. What happened to him after, my mother's sacrifice, is that he was destroyed but not completely. A fragment of him survived. He looked at his hands, at the bracelet. I think that fragment is in Quirrell. Sharing the body. Waiting. Silence. The fire. The common room's warmth. Waiting for what? Ron said, very quietly. The stone, Hermione said. She'd been there when Harry had read the library entry. She'd done the math. The philosopher's stone makes the elixir of life. With the stone he could, come back, Harry said. Properly. A new body. Real power again. He looked at them both. Someone put the stone here because they thought this was the safest place for it. I think that same someone also maneuvered the fragment, Voldemort, his name is Voldemort, I'm going to call him what he is, into a position where he'd have access to the stone when the time came. Why would Dumbledore? Hermione stopped. Started again more carefully. Why would anyone who wants to protect the stone put it somewhere its enemy can reach it? Because, Harry said, the enemy reaching for it is a useful event if you've set up the right response to that event. Another silence. A trap, Ron said. Like you said in the library. The stone's the bait. And the response is supposed to be me, Harry said. I think. I'm still working out the specifics. He looked at the fire. I think someone has been making calculations about my future for a very long time. And those calculations involve me encountering Voldemort in a controlled environment and winning. That's, Ron started. Arrogant, Hermione said. On someone's part. Assuming they can predict what an 11-year-old will do in a confrontation with a dark wizard. Assuming they can predict what I will do, Harry said, with the precise, unhurried confidence of someone who has thought this through thoroughly. Which they can't. Because every calculation about me starts from information that was already wrong 10 years ago on a doorstep in Surrey. He picked up his book. So what are you going to do? Ron said. I'm going to keep watching Quirrell. I'm going to understand the obstacle course on the 3rd floor well enough to navigate it faster than Quirrell can. And when the moment comes, he turned a page, I'm going to handle it on my terms. Not whoever's terms. What if Dumbledore's terms are actually fine? Ron said. They might be, Harry said. I'll find out when I know what they are. Until then I'm not walking into a planned encounter blind and trusting that someone else's plan accounts for me correctly. Hermione nodded slowly. That's reasonable. It's very Tony Stark, Ron said. Is that a criticism? Harry said. No, Ron said. It's a compliment. Your dad's brilliant. It's just also a bit terrifying when you do it. Good, Harry said pleasantly, and went back to his book. December came. Christmas approached with the good domestic momentum of a school counting down toward a break, and Ron invited Harry to the Burrow for the holidays, which Harry had accepted immediately and with genuine warmth because the Weasleys had already begun the adoption process that Ron had predicted. Mrs. Weasley's letters were arriving twice a week now and were so full of warmth and recipes and cheerful inquiry that Harry read them alongside Tony's messages and found they occupied a similar register of people who care about you and aren't subtle about it. He went home to Malibu first, which was the plan, 2 weeks with Tony and Pepper, then a few days at the Burrow before the new term. The train back south, then the airport, then the familiar weight of Malibu air and Pacific light and the workshop's particular smell of metal and something electrical. Tony met him at the door. They did the brief hug-turn-slightly less brief thing, which they'd been doing at reunions since Harry was old enough to understand that Tony's version of "I missed you" expressed itself through physical contact and then immediate technical distraction. Jarvis debriefed me, Tony said, stepping back, looking at him. Looking at him the way parents look at children who've been away, running the comparison against the last stored version. He debriefs you constantly, Harry said. He does. It's great. I love the pen, I'm calling it my best invention. Tony turned and walked toward the workshop because that was the direction conversations about serious things went. You look taller. 3 months at Hogwarts. 3 months at Hogwarts where someone tried to kill you on a broomstick. I handled it. You did, Tony said, and there was something in it that wasn't criticism but wasn't entirely comfortable either. The specific quality of a parent who is proud and terrified simultaneously and has developed the skill of leading with proud. Tell me about the broom jinx mechanics. I want to understand what you were working against. They spent 2 hours in the workshop, Harry at the whiteboard, Tony asking questions with the focused intensity he brought to problems he cared about. Pepper appeared at some point with food and the expression of someone who had been managing her own feelings about the broom incident for several weeks and had reached equanimity through effort, and she sat with them and listened and occasionally asked the question that reframed the conversation when it needed it. The fragment, Pepper said at one point. Voldemort's, the piece of him that's in Quirrell. What does it feel like to be near it? Harry thought about how to answer this honestly. Cold. Specific kind of cold, like the absence of something rather than the presence of something cold. And my scar reacts. He touched it. It's been doing that since the first night at the feast. When I make eye contact with Quirrell, specifically. Pepper and Tony exchanged a look that Harry was old enough to read. The look was, we're going to process our feelings about that separately. The scar, Tony said carefully. Jarvis has been monitoring it. The readings are unusual, Jarvis supplied from the workshop speakers. Yeah. Tony looked at the data Jarvis pulled up on the main screen, a field resonance map of Harry's scar, taken in biometric readings over the past 3 months, showing regular activation spikes. It's not just a scar. It's a receiver, Harry said. I've been thinking about it. If Voldemort's curse reflected and damaged him, and if my mother's protection created a magical bond in the rebounding, the scar might be the physical record of a connection that still exists. He paused. Between me and whatever's left of him. Tony put down his tablet. He looked at his son for a long moment. That's a hell of a thing to be carrying around on your forehead. I've had it my whole life, Harry said. I'd rather understand it than be afraid of it. Tony nodded slowly. Okay. We're going to understand it. He crossed to the main display and started pulling up files. I've been building a model of your magic's interaction with the reactor since you were 2. I want to add the scar data to it. If there's a resonance connection we might be able to characterize it. You think physics can characterize a soul connection, Harry said. I think physics can characterize anything if we have enough data and we're patient. Tony pulled up a schematic. Also, magic isn't outside physics. It's just physics we haven't learned the rules of yet. Harry looked at the schematic. McGonagall would have opinions about that. McGonagall can come to Malibu and have them. She might, actually. She seemed interested in the theory. Tony looked pleased. I like her. You've met her once. Once was enough. She told me my parenting instincts were surprisingly sound and then looked like she'd surprised herself by saying it. Harry smiled. The workshop was the same as it always was, the smell, the hum, the comfortable evidence of work in progress, and he was back in it and it was exactly what it was supposed to be, which was home in the specific way that the specific place where specific people who love you are. He stayed in Malibu for 12 days and they were good days, the uncomplicated kind, Tony in the workshop and Pepper running the world and Harry moving between both with the ease of someone who belongs completely somewhere. He and Tony built a new frequency isolation component for the bracelet, an upgrade on the design Harry had prototyped at school, with tighter tolerances and a response time that Jarvis clocked at 0.003 seconds, which meant it was faster than conscious thought. Tony declared it elegant, which was the highest compliment in the Stark vocabulary for a physical object. He and Pepper had two specific long conversations, the kind they'd always had, that went to places that a lot of parents and children didn't go, one about his parents, James and Lily, and what little she could tell him about the people they'd have been beyond what McGonagall and Snape's careful fragments had suggested. And one about the Dumbledore question, which Pepper engaged with the same careful precision she brought to complex institutional problems. He's not wrong, necessarily, she said. About Voldemort being a threat. About the stone needing protection. About the response requiring someone with your specific connection. No, Harry agreed. But the way he's going about it, she held her coffee mug in both hands, he's managing outcomes instead of people. He's running a strategy that involves your life as a variable, and he made that decision when you were 1 year old and your parents were dead and he didn't ask anyone's permission. He couldn't ask my permission. No. But he could have made choices that kept more options open. Instead he made choices that narrowed them. She looked at him. If things had gone the way he planned, if you'd grown up at the Dursleys, what kind of person do you think you'd be walking into that third-floor corridor? Harry thought about it honestly. A child who'd been left and not quite loved and told he was special by people who didn't know him, walking toward a destiny someone else designed. He thought about the specific kind of need that would create, the need to be what the destiny required because that was the only version of yourself that seemed to have value. Easier to manage, Harry said. Yes, Pepper said. I'm not easy to manage. You're not manageable at all, she said, with enormous affection. You're also more capable and more whole and more prepared than anything his plan anticipated. Whatever happens with the stone and Quirrell and all of it, you're going to handle it as yourself, not as the version of yourself he was building. Harry looked at his bracelet. The blue-gold warmth of it, the arc reactor's note in the metal, in his magic, in everything he'd built and was still building. Yeah, he said. The burrow was a different kind of warmth entirely and he loved it immediately, the house that defied physics through magical addition, 7 stories of improbable lean, the garden full of gnomes who conducted themselves with an unearned dignity, Mrs. Weasley at the kitchen table in an apron producing quantities of food that suggested she understood love as a primarily nutritional expression. There were 6 Weasley children at various ages moving through the space and talking over each other and treating Harry, from the first hour, as a 7th, which was the best possible welcome. He slept in Ron's room under a slanted ceiling covered in Chudley Cannon's posters and wrote in his notebook by wandlight and listened to the sounds of a large family being a large family, which was different from the sounds of 3 people being a 3-person family in a Malibu penthouse, but carried the same register, the same frequency of belonging. He went back to Hogwarts on January 1st with everything he'd worked out and everything he'd built and the particular quality of readiness that comes from being completely, unequivocally known by the people who matter to you. Whatever was going to happen in that third-floor corridor, he was ready. Not because someone had planned it that way. Because he was Harry Stark. Chapter 5, The Philosopher's Stone. The corridor on the 3rd floor smelled of dog. Harry registered this the moment he and Ron and Hermione pushed the door open, not metaphorically, not faintly, but the full committed smell of a very large animal in an enclosed space, the kind that preceded the animal itself by a meaningful distance. It was also the smell of something older underneath it, cold stone and something almost chemical, the ambient residue of whatever lay further in. He'd been here before. Not physically, he'd respected the boundary in the same way he respected incomplete data, not with timidity but with the patience of someone who waits until the picture is full enough to act on. But he'd mapped the floor from outside, bracelet raised to the corridor door on 4 separate nights between January and May, taking field readings through the stone, charting the magical signatures of what lay within. He knew the obstacle sequence. Hermione had worked out the devil's snare. Ron had identified the chessboard from the field pattern, a large sustained enchantment with the resonance of animated pieces at scale. Harry had catalogued the rest. The timing was Quirrell. He'd moved. Harry had felt it at dinner, the secondary field signature shifting from its usual compressed patience into something active, purposeful, directional. The cold dark quality of it changing the way a compressed spring changes when the catch releases. He'd looked at Hermione, and she'd looked at him, and Ron had seen both of them look and set down his fork immediately. Now. Ron had said. Now, Harry had said. They'd left dinner at 7:43 p.m. The corridor door at 7:51. Fluffy, which was what Hagrid had named the three-headed dog, with the cheerful incongruity that characterized most of Hagrid's naming decisions, was asleep on the trapdoor when they came in, all 3 enormous heads down. The music from the harp Quirrell had charmed into playing already fading as its spell wound down. The trapdoor was open. He's already through, Hermione said. Yes. Harry crossed the room without hesitation, stepping around Fluffy's enormous paws. The dog stirred in sleep, one head lifting, a rumbling that could have been a snore or a warning. Harry touched the floor beside it briefly, a thread of calm through his fingertips, and the rumbling subsided. Fluffy's head went back down. Did you just, Ron said. The calming frequency. I've been testing it through the door for 2 months. Harry crouched over the open trapdoor. Darkness below. The devil's snare, then the winged keys, then the chess room, then something he hadn't fully resolved in his readings, a smell-based potion challenge, he thought, based on the faint chemical register, and then the chamber at the end. And Quirrell. And whatever Quirrell carried. You've been testing it through the door for 2 months, Hermione repeated. I do careful reconnaissance, Harry said, and dropped through. The devil's snare caught him immediately, which it was designed to do, dark tendrils wrapping his arms and torso with the determined muscle of a plant that had been waiting down here in the dark for something to catch. Harry felt it, felt the response of the plant's field. It was alive, which meant it had a frequency, which meant his bracelet could communicate with it in the most basic sense, and he pushed warmth through his palms, not fire, not the repulsion frequency, just warmth, the suggestion of sunlight, and the plant recoiled with the decisiveness of something following its fundamental nature. He dropped to solid ground. A moment later Hermione dropped beside him, landing clean and light. She'd done the fire charm simultaneously with his approach, which was Hermione. She'd had 2 contingency plans prepared and deployed the appropriate one without hesitation. Ron fell through above them, panicked the way anyone panics when something is actively grabbing them, and Harry reached up and pulled the vines from him with both hands and a clean burst of heat frequency through his bracelet. Thanks, Ron gasped. Forward, Harry said. The key chamber was a large vaulted room full of winged keys swooping in arcs between the walls, and a broomstick on the ground, and a locked door. The field signature of the enchanted lock told him which key, the oldest, the most used, the one trailing slightly from 100 catches over years. Harry took the broom, went to 300 feet in 4 seconds, found the key in 8 more, and was back on the ground in under a minute. Hermione unlocked the door. Ron hadn't needed to do anything and looked slightly cheated. On the next one, Harry said. The chess room was the next one, and it was everything the field readings had suggested: enormous marble pieces, a life-size board, the enchantment complex and layered and genuinely intelligent in the way that sustained magical constructs sometimes became when they'd been active long enough to develop something like preference. The pieces watched them come in with the attention of players who've seen this before. "This is mine," Ron said. Harry looked at the board. At the pieces. At Ron. "Yes," Harry said. "It is." Ron stood at the edge of the board and looked at it with an expression Harry recognized, the same one he wore over chessboards in the common room, the one that meant he'd stopped being Ron who was nervous about most things and had become Ron who understood this particular system better than most people who'd ever studied it. He called them to positions with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to perform confidence because they had the real kind. Harry was a bishop. Hermione a rook. Ron the knight that mattered. The game was real in the way that made it more than a game, real enough that the white pieces moved against them with genuine tactical intelligence, real enough that the board felt like a place rather than a surface, real enough that when White's queen took a pawn in the early middle game it struck stone with a sound that traveled through the floor. Ron played fast, which Harry had observed before. He didn't deliberate long, he saw the lines quickly and trusted them. He sacrificed 2 pieces in the middle game with the cold precision of someone who'd done the math on what could be lost without losing, and then he called the move that broke White's formation open. The White King's rook was taken. White's pattern collapsed. Harry and Hermione crossed to the door. "Ron," Harry said, turning back. The knight Ron had ridden was still on the board. Ron was still in the square. "Game's not done if I move," Ron said. "The enchantment, the pieces are still active if there's a player in position." "I know," Harry said. "Go," Ron said. "I'll wait here." Harry looked at him. Ron had the specific expression of someone who'd found the thing they were both good at and needed for, and was completely at peace with it. No performance, no martyrdom. Just certainty. "I'll come back through this room," Harry said. "I know you will," Ron said, and grinned, easy and real. "Go sort out the dark wizard." Harry went. The troll room was already dealt with. Quirrell had done that one himself, the troll unconscious in the corner with a quality of violence about its state that said it had been dispatched efficiently and without particular concern. The potion chamber was next, 7 bottles on a table and a line of fire across both exits, the puzzle a logic problem embedded in a verse on a scroll. Hermione solved it in 45 seconds with the focused pleasure of someone who has been waiting their entire academic life for a puzzle that uses their actual abilities. "This one's safe, 1 bottle forward," she said, "and this one back through the black fire." She held the smaller bottle out to Harry. "There's barely a mouthful." "You go back through," Harry said. "Get Ron. Get out of the school." "Harry, I need you to do this part," Harry said. Not because he needed her gone, but because the next room was a one-person encounter and having Hermione in it would give whatever was waiting their leverage over him. He'd thought about this. The chess board could hold Ron safely until the enchantment released. Hermione needed to be mobile. She looked at him with the expression she reserved for moments when she was processing something at speed and reaching a conclusion she wasn't entirely happy with but couldn't argue against. "Then, when you come back, tell me everything." "Everything," Harry said. She went through the black flames. He drank the bottle and went forward. The last chamber was circular, lit by torches that burned with a purple-blue light that had nothing natural about it. The mirror of Eriste stood in the center, tall and ornate, its frame carved with the inscription he'd read about, Eriste stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi, the palindrome that Jarvis had translated in approximately 1 second when Harry had found the reference and which meant "I show not your face but your heart's desire." The stone floor in front of it was cold. Quirrell was standing at the mirror. He wasn't stuttering. "I wondered when you'd come," Quirrell said, and his voice was his own voice without the performed fumbling, even and precise. He didn't turn around. He was looking at the mirror with the frustrated intensity of someone who has been at a problem for a while and hasn't solved it. "I can see myself presenting the stone to my master. But I cannot determine how to obtain it. The mirror shows desire but not method." A pause. Perhaps you'll be more useful. Probably not, Harry said. But let's talk first. Quirrell turned. Harry had seen him in classes for 8 months. He'd mapped his double field signature from 30 feet away for 8 months. He'd built a comprehensive model of what Quirrell and not Quirrell looked like at distance. Up close was different. The man's eyes were wrong, not Quirrell's nervous blink and deflect, not the secondary signature's cold patience, but a state that was somewhere between them, both present simultaneously, the host and the passenger in an ongoing negotiation that Quirrell was losing. The turban was still on his head. Harry's scar was a steady warmth. "You've been watching me," Quirrell said. It wasn't accusatory. It was the tone of someone confirming a hypothesis. "Since the feast," Harry said. "Your field signature is doubled. Dark magic occupying a living host has a specific resonance pattern." He tilted his head. "I've been building a model of it for 8 months. A silence. Then, from Quirrell, or through Quirrell, a different quality of speech, slower and more deliberate, the secondary signature's influence over the vocal cords increasing. You are not what I expected." "People keep telling me that," Harry said. Harry Potter should have come here frightened. Should have come here driven by the need to prove something to the world that hadn't loved him. The voice that wasn't entirely Quirrell's was conversational, which was the most unsettling version of it Harry had encountered. "Instead you come with a bracelet full of physics and an AI in your pocket and 8 months of reconnaissance. Your mother would have been." "Don't," Harry said. The temperature dropped. Not the cold dark temperature of the secondary signature, the air temperature, Harry's voice, the register of the room. Very calm. Very final. Quirrell, who was not only Quirrell, took a step back involuntarily. "The stone," Harry said. "You can't get it from the mirror." "I can." He crossed to the mirror and stood in front of it and looked at his own reflection. He saw himself standing in the mirror. No great desire revealed, not gold, not power, not some glowing future. Just himself, with one small difference. In the mirror's version of the room, his bracelet was off his wrist, and the hand it had been on was raised, open, entirely unconstrained, the blue-gold light of his field running free and full and uncontained, bright as a small sun, illuminating the whole mirror chamber without a source. His heart's desire was to be fully himself without limits. In his pocket he felt something shift and solidify, small, smooth, heavier than it should be. He reached in without looking away from the mirror and closed his fingers around the stone. "You have it," Quirrell said. He'd moved closer. The room's temperature was dropping now with his approach, the secondary signature rising as the passenger asserted control more fully. "You have it and you will give it to me." "No," Harry said, turning. Quirrell's hand shot out and grabbed Harry's wrist, his left wrist, the one without the bracelet. His grip was strong, urgent, and then something happened. Quirrell screamed. Harry hadn't done anything. He'd felt the contact and registered it and braced for whatever the secondary signature would do through the physical connection, but the scream wasn't the scream of attack, it was the scream of pain, of burning, the scream of a hand meeting something hostile to its nature. Quirrell released him and looked at his own palm, which was blistering at the points where his fingers had been. Harry looked at his own wrist. No mark. No injury. But the warmth there was significant, a heat that went past the skin, and the scar above his eyebrow was very warm, and he thought with the part of him that was always thinking even mid-crisis, the protection. My mother's protection. Still active. Physical contact with me is hostile to whatever he's carrying. He thought this in approximately 1 second and had the next decision ready before the second ended. Quirrell lunged. Harry stepped aside with the ease of someone who'd learned from Tony that the body's instincts in motion are faster than conscious thought when you trust them, and Quirrell's momentum carried him past, and Harry put his bracelet hand against the man's back between his shoulders as he passed. Not attack. Contact. Full contact, no gloves, no barrier, the bracelet at peak output and his field running through the physical connection and the warmth of his mother's protection conducting through it, and what happened in the space of that contact was something Harry felt rather than saw. The secondary signature flared, the cold dark presence inside Quirrell igniting against the warmth the way ice ignites against heat, not burning so much as ceasing, the coherence of it disrupting, the careful compression of the fragment that had sustained it for a year suddenly unable to maintain structure against what Harry was. The field readings were extraordinary. Jarvis was recording all of it at maximum resolution. Quirrell collapsed. Not violently, he folded, the way a structure folds when its load-bearing principle is removed, sitting down hard on the stone floor and looking at his hands and looking at Harry with his own eyes, Quirrell's eyes, for the first time since Harry had observed him. Something in the man's face that had been absent for a long time came back, awareness and horror at its own absence, the terrible clarity of waking up. What? Quirrell's voice was only his own now. Thin and frightened and real. What have you done? I can't, it's gone, I can't. Harry crouched in front of him. The stone was in his fist. His scar had gone from warm to still. You need to get out of this room, Harry said. Now, while you can. Whatever loyalty you had to him, he stopped, found a better word. Whatever he made you feel was loyalty. It's gone. Go. He'll come back, Quirrell said. He's not gone, you can't, he's not gone, Harry agreed. But he's not in you anymore. You have a choice about what you do next. Make a better one than the last one. He stood. Go, Quirrell. Quirrell went, unsteadily, through the door and the potion challenge and the chess room toward whatever the rest of his life was going to be. Harry stood in the chamber alone with the mirror of Eriste and the philosopher's stone and the silence of a room where something large had just shifted. He opened his fist. The stone sat in his palm, smooth and red and entirely real, heavier than its size suggested, warm with a warmth that wasn't his. He clicked the pen. J. Present. Jarvis's voice through the pen was steady. All readings nominal. Your biometrics are elevated but within acceptable parameters. The secondary magical signature I've been tracking from Quirrell is gone. I'm reading nothing from the chamber except ambient castle field and you. Did you get everything? Everything. Full recording from the moment you entered. The contact event has a field signature unlike anything in my database, Harry. The way the protection conducted through your field and disrupted the fragment is, I have a lot of analysis to do. Good. Harry looked at the stone. I need to talk to Dumbledore. I assumed. He's already on his way to the school. I've been tracking a significant magical signature approaching from the northwest for the past 20 minutes. He was alerted. Someone on staff. McGonagall, Harry said. She'd have noticed us leave dinner. He looked at the mirror one more time. His reflection looked back, bracelet off, hand open, light full and free and entirely itself. Okay, he said to it, and left the chamber. He came through the chess room first. Ron was still at his square, sitting cross-legged on the marble piece, playing an imaginary game against himself with the focused patience of someone who decided the wait wasn't going to be wasted. He looked up when Harry came through. You got it, Ron said, looking at Harry's fist. I got it. Harry opened his hand. Ron looked at the stone. He's gone. Quirrell, he left this way a few minutes ago. I know. I let him pass. Figured you knew what you were doing. Ron stood, stretched, stepped off the piece. The board's enchantment registered the departure and the pieces relaxed their positions, the white side going still. He's himself again. For now. Harry kept walking. Let's go. Hermione. Waiting past the flame room. She was, in fact, on the other side of the black flame with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who had been making peace with the situation for approximately 15 minutes and had mostly achieved it through mathematical displacement. She looked at Harry, at Ron, at the stone. Are you hurt? She said, to Harry first and then immediately at Ron. "No," Harry said. Ron shook his head. "Quirrell." She was already reaching for Harry's wrist, checking, looking. Gone. Out of the castle by now probably. Harry let her check his wrist, which was uninjured but which she clearly needed to see. "Hermione." "Yes." "The protection." "My mother's." "It still works." He paused. "Through my field." "Through the bracelet." "It conducted." He held up his wrist. "When he touched me, the bare skin, the contact, it disrupted the fragment. Drove it out." Hermione looked at his wrist and then at the bracelet and then at Harry with the expression she reserved for genuinely new information, the look of someone whose model of something has just been substantially revised and who is excited and alarmed simultaneously. "So the protection isn't just passive," she said. "It isn't just a shield. It's integrated," Harry said. "With my field. With everything I am." He thought about the mirror, what it had shown him. Himself, unconstrained, full. "My mother didn't just protect me. She put something into me. Something that became part of how I work." A silence. The torchlight. The smell of the potion chamber behind them. "That's why you survived," Hermione said. "Not just survived the curse. Survived being yourself. All of it." She pressed her hand to her mouth for a moment, the specific gesture she made when something was large enough to require a brief physical acknowledgement. "Harry." "I know," he said. "Come on. Dumbledore's coming." They found him in the corridor on the ground floor, not the third floor, not the entrance hall, but the second-floor corridor that connected the hospital wing to the east staircase, which was where Harry had calculated their paths would intersect based on the direction Jarvis had tracked the approaching magical signature and the most probable route from the school gates. Dumbledore stopped when he saw them. He was exactly what Harry had expected, which was a man who was more than his appearance but used his appearance deliberately. The silver beard, the robes, the half-moon glasses, the air of someone who inhabited wisdom as a practiced and functional mode of being rather than an accidental quality. He was old in the way that some things were old, not tired but deep, layered with time that had been used rather than elapsed. His eyes, Harry noted, were very blue and very sharp behind the benevolent surface, and they went immediately to the stone in Harry's hand and then to Harry's face and then, briefly, and this was interesting, to the bracelet. "My boy," Dumbledore said. His voice was warm and grave and precisely calibrated. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. "I see you have the stone. Smooth, no alarm in it. A man absorbing information and adjusting around it in real time. And I see you are uninjured. And I see," a glance at Ron and Hermione, "that you brought friends. They're not props in the story," Harry said. "They're here because they chose to be." A slight pause. The recalibration that people did when Harry said something direct enough to skip the social scaffolding. "Of course." He extended his hand gently. "May I?" "Yes," Harry said, and placed the stone in his palm. "I don't want it. What I want is a conversation." Dumbledore looked at the stone. Looked at Harry. Something moved across his face that was more complex than the warm-wise surface usually permitted, something that was recognition, and calculation, and something Harry thought might be the closest Dumbledore came to genuine surprise. "A conversation," Dumbledore said. "About a lot of things," Harry said. "But we can start with the obvious one. You knew Quirrell had Voldemort in him." The name landed in the corridor and Hermione and Ron both flinched slightly with the reflex conditioning of a world that had avoided it for a decade. Dumbledore didn't flinch. He studied Harry. "I suspected," Dumbledore said carefully. "I could not confirm, you could have confirmed. You chose to observe instead." Harry kept his voice even, not accusatory, just accurate. "The same way you chose to put the stone here instead of somewhere Voldemort couldn't reach it. You made this encounter possible. You structured it. The corridor was very quiet. "You're remarkably perceptive," Dumbledore said. "I'm well prepared," Harry said. "Which is a different thing. Perceptive implies it's natural. It's not. I spent months building a model of what was happening here, and I had help from people who are very good at exactly this kind of problem." He paused. "My parents. The ones who raised me." A small emphasis on the word. It landed exactly where he'd put it. Dumbledore was still for a moment. He looked at Harry, looked at him the way Harry imagined he'd looked at a great many people over a great many years, the long assessing gaze of someone who calculated by observation. Only this time Harry looked back with the same quality of attention, and whatever Dumbledore was used to seeing in return, it wasn't this. "You know about my arrangement," Dumbledore said. "About what I intended for you." "I know what the letter said," Harry said. "My dad binned it. He told me when I was 9. Another silence. Dumbledore lowered his eyes briefly, and it was the closest Harry had seen him come to something like chagrin. "I made decisions," Dumbledore said, "that I believed were necessary. Given what is coming, what will still come, because tonight's events have not ended this, I needed you to be prepared in a specific way, you needed me to be shaped," Harry said. "Not prepared. There's a difference." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "Prepared means you know what's coming and you have tools and people and a real understanding of what you're facing. Shaped means someone else decided what you needed to know and not know, what you needed to suffer and not suffer, who you needed to be." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You were building a weapon out of a child who didn't have anyone. And then the child had someone, and the weapon never got built, and I think part of you has been calculating around that for 11 years. The silence this time was longer. Hermione was very still. Ron was watching Dumbledore with the focused unblinking attention he reserved for chess opponents he was trying to read. Dumbledore said, carefully, "Do you think I'm wrong? About the threat?" "No," Harry said immediately. "Voldemort is a genuine danger and he's going to come back, and the connection between us through my scar is real and it's going to matter. I'm not arguing with your threat assessment. I'm arguing with your methodology." He paused. "You can tell me things. You can tell me what you know, what you suspect, what the shape of the danger is, and I will take that information seriously because I take everything seriously. What I won't be is uninformed and unequipped and dependent on your plan working out." "I see," Dumbledore said. He was doing the thing Harry recognized now, reprocessing, adjusting, the internal recalibration that was more visible in him than he knew because his control was focused on his expression rather than the quality of his stillness. "Also," Harry said, "you should call Nicholas Flamel before you do anything with the stone. It's his." Dumbledore looked at the stone in his hand. And then, slowly, he did something Harry hadn't expected. He smiled, not the warm public one, something smaller and more genuine, the smile of someone who has received an answer that was not what they planned for and has found, despite themselves, that they don't entirely dislike it. "You are nothing like I expected," Dumbledore said. "I know," Harry said. "I've heard. I expect we'll talk further. I'll clear time in my schedule," Harry said, and Dumbledore's small smile deepened almost imperceptibly. They talked to McGonagall next, who had been waiting at the top of the third-floor staircase with the specific kind of rigid composure that meant she'd been extremely frightened and had converted it entirely to authority as a coping strategy. She looked at all three of them with the thoroughness of someone checking for damage, and when she found none, something in her shoulders that had been very tight released. "The hospital wing," she said. "All three of you. Now." "We're fine," Ron said. "Madame Pomfrey will confirm that," McGonagall said, and turned, and they followed because McGonagall turning and walking was not an invitation to discussion. Madame Pomfrey confirmed they were fine, then gave them each a chocolate frog with the specific combination of medical and maternal energy that she deployed when the situation had been dangerous enough to require nourishment as protocol. Harry ate his and wrote in his notebook and let Ron and Hermione do most of the talking that Pomfrey's attentiveness required, because he was still processing. Not the stone or Quirrell or Dumbledore, those he'd prepared for, accounted for, moved through. He was processing the mirror. His heart's desire, fully himself, unconstrained, the bracelet off and the light full and free. He thought about what that meant. Not as a wish but as information. The bracelet was the right tool for now, he built it because precision mattered, because the choice of restraint was different from the imposition of it. But the desire underneath was real. The desire to be exactly what he was, completely, without the architecture of containment between himself and the world. He wasn't there yet. He was 11. There was time. He clicked the pen. Send Dad the full file. Already compiling. He's been monitoring biometrics for the past 2 hours. I've been keeping him updated at 60-second intervals. How is he? His own biometrics suggest he is managing significant stress through the activity of building something in the workshop. He's dismantled and rebuilt the same component 3 times. Harry felt a specific warm pull in his chest that had nothing to do with magic. Tell him I'm okay. Tell him in detail. Send the recordings. Already sent. He's reviewing them now. A pause. He says, and again quoting directly, tell him I'm going to Scotland tomorrow. Harry looked at the hospital wing ceiling. Tell him he doesn't need to. He says he knows he doesn't need to. He wants to. A longer pause. Harry looked at his bracelet. At the warmth of it. Tell him, Harry said, to bring Pepper. Dumbledore's conversation with Harry happened 2 days later in the headmaster's office, which was everything the headmaster's office should be and then additionally full of portraits of sleeping former headmasters and one bird that turned out to be a phoenix and which Harry found extremely interesting from a magical field perspective. Dumbledore told him things. More than Harry had expected, the full shape of the prophecy, the nature of the connection through the scar, his theory about what Voldemort's survival meant and what his return would likely look like. He told it in the tone of someone who had spent a decade holding information close and found the act of releasing it unfamiliar, not unwilling, just unpracticed. Harry listened. He asked 7 questions that Dumbledore stopped and genuinely considered before answering, which meant they were the right questions. Jarvis recorded everything with the permission of both parties, which Dumbledore had granted with a gracious nod when Harry asked, and which Harry suspected Dumbledore found either reassuring or strategic, and was making peace with not being sure which. The Horcruxes, Harry said, near the end. Dumbledore looked at him. The way you described the fragment in Quirrell, fragmented, degraded, compressed. That's not what a soul looks like when it's simply been damaged. That's what it looks like when a piece of it has been intentionally split and stored. Harry looked at his notes. Horcruxes. Dark objects for soul storage. If Voldemort made more than one, if the fragment in Quirrell was one of multiple, you have been reading extensively, Dumbledore said. I found the darkest of magical theory in a shop in Edinburgh in December, Harry said. The restricted section copy has several pages removed. The Edinburgh one didn't. A pause. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that had layered through several things and arrived at something that was very close to frank. I have suspected this for some time, he said. I had not yet determined how to raise it. Raise it with me, Harry said. I want to know what we're actually dealing with. Dumbledore raised it. The conversation went another hour. When Tony and Pepper arrived the next morning, Harry met them at the school gates, which was not where visiting parents usually met students but which was where Harry chose to be because the walk from the gates to the castle gave him 12 minutes of time that was just theirs before it became anything institutional. Tony got out of the car. McGonagall had arranged a magical transport from Edinburgh that Tony had immediately started asking engineering questions about, to the driver's considerable confusion, and looked at Harry for a long moment the way he'd looked at him in Malibu after 3 months away, running the comparison. His expression didn't do anything dramatic. It didn't need to. He crossed the remaining distance and put both hands on Harry's shoulders and looked at him at eye level, which he had to bend slightly to do now. You're taller, Tony said. Definitely taller. Everyone says, and you went through a dark wizard's obstacle course and confronted a teacher with a fragmented Dark Lord living in his head and handled it, and then you had a conversation with Dumbledore that Jarvis tells me was frankly impressive, and you're standing here completely fine. Tony's hands on his shoulders were very steady. I need you to know that all of that is, he stopped. I'm very proud of you, and I'm also going to redesign your bracelet's emergency signal protocol because 40 minutes is too long for me to be away in a situation like the one last night, and I'm going to say both those things with exactly equal emphasis. Equal emphasis, Harry said. Equal emphasis. Pepper had come up beside Tony and she put her hand briefly on the back of Harry's head, fingers in his hair, a gesture she'd had since he was small that meant something she'd never had to put into words because it was already complete. The next time, she said, quiet and sure, you tell us sooner. I wasn't sure it would happen when it did, Harry said. I know. But sooner. She dropped her hand. Deal. Deal, Harry said. They walked up to the castle together. Harry told them everything, not the Jarvis version, not the field data version, but the real version, the way it had felt, what he'd seen in the mirror, what the contact with the protection had done, what Dumbledore's office had smelled like and what the Phoenix looked like when it watched you and how Quirrell's eyes had gone from not his to his in the moment the fragment left him. Tony listened with complete attention and asked questions in the right places. Pepper listened with the quality of attention that didn't produce questions so much as it produced space, which was different and equally necessary. When Harry got to the mirror, what he'd seen, his heart's desire, Tony was quiet for a few paces. Yourself, Tony said. Fully myself. Unconstrained. Harry looked at his bracelet. It's not a complaint. The bracelet is right for now. But that's what's underneath. Tony nodded slowly. I know the feeling, he said, and his hand moved briefly to his chest, to the arc reactor. The reactor's not constraint, but it's also not, there's something under it that it's connected to, that it's an expression of. The thing underneath being more than the object. He looked at Harry. What you're going to be when you've got a handle on all of it, he shook his head once. No category for it. The Sorting Hat said that, Harry said. Don't let anyone put me in a category smaller than I am. Smart hat. Terrifying hat. But smart. They reached the castle doors and Hogwarts rose before them in the June morning light, the towers against clear sky, the grounds bright and the lake below perfectly still. Tony looked up at it with the expression he had looking at extraordinary engineering, the one that was both admiring and competitive, as though the building was something to have a conversation with. Extensive field architecture, Tony said. Isn't it, Harry said. I want to talk to whoever built the enchanted ceiling. They've been dead for about 600 years. I want to read their notes, then. Pepper caught Harry's eye. Harry caught hers. They shared, briefly, the specific warmth of two people who both love a third person unreservedly, including his unreasonable aspects. Inside, Dumbledore met them in the entrance hall, which was arranged as a gesture of welcome, tea, a conjured table, the casual authority of someone who owned the space making it feel like an invitation. He shook Tony's hand and then Pepper's, and his eyes were their most accessible when he looked at Tony, one intelligence studying another. Mr. Stark, Dumbledore said. Your son is remarkable. I know, Tony said. He gets it from his parents. A pause. Dumbledore looked at Tony and then at Harry and back. Indeed he does, he said, with something that had genuine warmth in it underneath the complexity of everything else, genuine and earned rather than deployed. They sat down. The conversation was long and covered ground that Harry had already covered with Dumbledore and covered new ground in the way of conversations between people who each have information the other doesn't. Tony had questions that Dumbledore hadn't been asked before, coming from the angle of someone who understood energy and systems and the physics of how things worked, and Dumbledore answered them with the generosity of someone who found the framing genuinely novel. Pepper had questions about process and protection and what the practical plan was for the following year and the year after, and those Dumbledore was more careful with but answered nonetheless. At one point Tony asked about Harry's scar and the Horcrux possibility Harry had raised, and Dumbledore was very still for a moment before he answered, and the answer was careful and incomplete, and Harry noted the incompleteness and filed it. He'd ask about that specifically, soon. Later. There was more in that particular pause than Dumbledore had released into speech. For now, the castle was warm in the June light and his parents were here and the stone was safe and Quirrell was gone and the stone's chamber was empty and the school year was almost done. For now, this was enough. In the evening, after the end-of-year feast with its points and its house cup, Gryffindor, which produced a celebration that vibrated through the stone floors, Harry sat on the steps outside the entrance hall with Tony beside him, both of them looking at the grounds going gold with the long Scottish evening light. "What's next year?" Tony said. "More of the same," Harry said. "Harder curriculum. Horcruxes to worry about eventually. Voldemort working on a way back that's more stable than Quirrell." He paused. "Jarvis thinks we should start building a Horcrux detection system based on the field signature we documented from the Quirrell encounter." "Jarvis is correct," Tony said. "I've already started the specs." "Of course you have. I started them on the drive from Edinburgh." Tony stretched his legs out on the steps. "I also started redesigning your bracelet's fourth band. The field isolation's good but I think we can get the response time under a millisecond." "I was thinking about that," Harry said. "The fourth band and the wand's amplification interact in a way that's creating a harmonic I want to use. Jarvis, record this." "Recording," Jarvis said from Harry's pocket. They talked until the light was gone and the stars came out over Scotland, the same stars the enchanted ceiling tried to show and the real ones through actual sky, both versions real in their own ways. Pepper came and sat on Tony's other side and said nothing for a while, just being there, which was its own complete thing. Harry sat between them on the steps of a castle full of magic he was learning and looked up at the stars he'd been looking at since he was small enough to reach toward them from between two people who'd kept him and loved him and let him become exactly what he was. The bracelet pulsed warm on his wrist. The same note it had played that first night, pressed against a chest full of light, on a doorstep in the rain. Still the same frequency. Always.